Preface of 8 Cousins. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Clarica. 8 Cousins by Louisa May Alcott. Preface. The author is quite aware of the defects of this little story, many of which were unavoidable, as it first appeared serially. But, as Uncle Alec's experiment was intended to amuse the young folks, rather than suggest educational improvements for the consideration of the elders, she trusts that these shortcomings will be overlooked by the friends of the 8 Cousins, and she will try to make amends in a second volume, which shall attempt to show the rose in bloom. Louisa May Alcott. Chapter 1. 2 Girls. Rose sat all alone in the big best parlor, with her little handkerchief laid ready to catch the first tear, for she was thinking of her troubles, and a shower was expected. She had retired to this room as a good place in which to be miserable, for it was dark and still, full of ancient furniture, sombre curtains, and hung all around with portraits of solemn old gentlemen in wigs, severe-nosed ladies in top-heavy caps, and staring children in little bob-tailed coats or short-waisted frocks. It was an excellent place for woe, and the fitful spring rain that pattered on the window-pane seemed to sob, "Cry away, I'm with you." Rose really did have some cause to be sad, for she had no mother, and had lately lost her father also, which left her no home but this with her great-aunts. She had been with them only a week, and though the dear old ladies had tried their best to make her happy, they had not succeeded very well, for she was unlike any child they had ever seen, and they felt very much as if they had the care of a low-spirited butterfly. They had given her the freedom of the house, and for a day or two she had amused herself roaming all over it, for it was a capital old mansion, and was full of all manner of odd nooks, charming rooms, and mysterious passages. Windows broke out in unexpected places, little balconies overhung the garden most romantically, and there was a long upper hall full of curiosities from all parts of the world, for the Campbells had been sea captains for generations. Aunt Plenty had even allowed Rose to rummage in her great china closet as a spicy retreat, rich in all the goodies that children love, but Rose seemed to care little for these toothsome temptations, and when that hope failed Aunt Plenty gave up in despair. Gentle Aunt Peace had tried all sorts of pretty needlework, and planned a doll's wardrobe that would have won the heart of even an older child, but Rose took little interest in pink satin hats and tiny hose, though she sewed dutifully till her aunt caught her wiping tears away with the train of a wedding dress, and that discovery put an end to the sewing society. Then both old ladies put their heads together and picked out the model child of the neighborhood to come and play with their niece. But Ariadne Blish was the worst failure of all, for Rose could not bear the sight of her, and said she was so like a wax doll she longed to give her a pinch and see if she would squeak. So prim little Ariadne was sent home, and the exhausted aunties left Rose to her own devices for a day or two. Bad weather and a cold kept her indoors, and she spent most of her time in the library where her father's books were stored. Here she read a great deal, cried a little, and dreamed many of the innocent, bright dreams in which imaginative children find such comfort and delight. This suited her better than anything else, but it was not good for her, and she grew pale, heavy-eyed, and listless, though Aunt Plenty gave her iron enough to make a cooking stove, and Aunt Peace petted her like a poodle. Seeing this, the poor aunties racked their brains for a new amusement, and determined to venture a bold stroke, though not very hopeful of its success. They said nothing to Rose about their plan for this Saturday afternoon, but left her alone till the time came for the grand surprise, little dreaming that the odd child would find pleasure for herself in a most unexpected quarter. Before she had time to squeeze out a single tear, a sound broke the stillness, making her prick up her ears. It was only the soft twitter of a bird, but it seemed to be a peculiarly gifted bird, for while she listened the soft twitter changed to a lively whistle, then a trill, a coo, a chirp, and ended in a musical mixture of all the notes, as if the bird burst out laughing. Rose laughed too, and forgetting her woes jumped up, saying eagerly, It is a mocking bird. Where is it?" Running down the long hall, she peeped out at both doors, but saw nothing feathered except a draggle-tailed chicken under a burdock leaf. She listened again, and the sound seemed to be in the house. Away she went, much excited by the chase, and following the changeful song, it led her to the china closet door. "In there? How funny!" she said. But when she entered, not a bird appeared except the everlastingly kissing swallows on the Canton china that lined the shelves. All of a sudden Rose's face brightened, and, softly opening the slide, she peered into the kitchen. But the music had stopped, and all she saw was a girl in a blue apron scrubbing the hearth. Rose stared about her for a minute, and then asked abruptly, "Did you hear that mocking bird?" "I should call it a phoebe bird," answered the girl, looking up with a twinkle in her black eyes. "Where did it go?" "It is here still." "Where?" "In my throat. Do you want to hear it?" "Oh, yes, I'll come in." And Rose crept through the slide to the wide shelf on the other side, being too hurried and puzzled to go round by the door. The girl wiped her hands, crossed her feet on the little island of carpet where she was stranded in a sea of soapsuds, and then, sure enough, out of her slender throat came the swallow's twitter, the robin's whistle, the blue jay's call, the thrush's song, the wood dove's coo, and many another familiar note, all ending as before with the musical ecstasy of a bobolink singing and swinging among the meadow grass on a bright June day. Rose was so astonished that she nearly fell off her perch, and when the little concert was over, clapped her hands delightedly. "Oh, it was lovely! Who taught you?" "The birds," answered the girl, with a smile, as she fell to work again. "It is very wonderful. I can sing, but nothing half so fine as that. What is your name, please?" "Phoebe Moore." "I've heard of phoebe birds, but I don't believe the real ones could do that," laughed Rose, adding as she watched with interest the scattering of dabs of soft soap over the bricks. "May I stay and see you work? It is very lonely in the parlor." "Yes, indeed, if you want to," answered Phoebe, wringing out her cloth in a capable sort of way that impressed Rose very much. "It must be fun to swash the water round and dig out the soap. I'd love to do it, only Aunt wouldn't like it, I suppose," said Rose, quite taken with the new employment. "You'd soon get tired, so you'd better keep tidy and look on." "I suppose you help your mother a good deal?" "I haven't got any folks." "Why, where do you live, then?" "I'm going to live here, I hope. Debbie wants some one to help round, and I've come to try for a week." "I hope you will stay, for it is very dull," said Rose, who had taken a sudden fancy to this girl, who sung like a bird and worked like a woman. "Hope I shall, for I'm 15 now and old enough to earn my own living. You have come to stay a spell, haven't you?" asked Phoebe, looking up at her guest and wondering how life could be dull to a girl who wore a silk frock, a daintily frilled apron, a pretty locket, and had her hair tied up with a velvet snood. "Yes, I shall stay till my uncle comes. He is my guardian now, and I don't know what he will do with me. Have you a guardian?" "My sakes, no. I was left on the poorhouse steps a little mite of a baby, and Miss Rogers took a liking to me, so I've been there ever since. But she is dead now, and I take care of myself." "How interesting! It is like Arabella Montgomery in The Gypsy's Child. Did you ever read that sweet story?" asked Rose, who was fond of tales of foundlings, and had read many. "I don't have any books to read, and all the spare time I get I run off into the woods. That rests me better than stories," answered Phoebe, as she finished one job and began on another. Rose watched her as she got out a great pan of beans to look over, and wondered how it would seem to have life all work and no play. Presently Phoebe seemed to think it was her turn to ask questions, and said, wistfully, "You've had lots of schooling, I suppose?" "Oh, dear me, yes. I've been at boarding school nearly a year, and I'm almost dead with lessons. The more I got, the more Miss Power gave me, and I was so miserable that I most cried my eyes out. Papa never gave me hard things to do, and he always taught me so pleasantly I love to study. Oh, we were so happy and so fond of one another, but now he is gone, and I am left all alone." The tear that would not come when Rose sat waiting for it, came now of its own accord, 2 of them, in fact, and rolled down her cheeks, telling the tale of love and sorrow better than any words could do it. For a minute there was no sound in the kitchen but the little daughter's sobbing and the sympathetic patter of the rain. Phoebe stopped rattling her beans from one pan to the other, and her eyes were full of pity as they rested on the curly head bent down on Rose's knee, for she saw that the heart under the pretty locket ached with its loss, and the dainty apron was used to dry sadder tears than any she had ever shed. Somehow she felt more contented with her brown calico gown and blue-checked pinafore. Envy changed to compassion, and if she had dared she would have gone and hugged her afflicted guest. Fearing that might not be considered proper, she said in her cheery voice, "I'm sure you ain't all alone with such a lot of folks belonging to you, and all so rich and clever. You'll be petted to pieces, Debbie says, because you are the only girl in the family." Phoebe's last words made Rose smile in spite of her tears, and she looked out from behind her apron with an April face, saying in a tone of comic distress, "That's one of my troubles. I've got 6 aunts, and they all want me, and I don't know any of them very well. Papa named this place the ant hill, and now I see why." Phoebe laughed with her as she said encouragingly, "Everyone calls it so, and it's a real good name, for all the Mrs. Campbells live handy by, and keep coming up to see the old ladies. I could stand the aunts, but there are dozens of cousins, dreadful boys all of them, and I detest boys. Some of them came to see me last Wednesday, but I was lying down, and when auntie came to call me I went under the quilt and pretended to be asleep. I shall have to see them sometime, but I do dread it so." And Rose gave a shudder, for, having lived alone with her invalid father, she knew nothing of boys, and considered them a species of wild animal. "Oh, I guess you'll like 'em. I've seen 'em flying around when they come over from the Point, sometimes in their boats and sometimes on horseback. If you like boats and horses, you'll enjoy yourself first rate." "But I don't. I'm afraid of horses, and boats make me ill, and I hate boys." And poor Rose wrung her hands at the awful prospect before her. One of these horrors alone she could have borne, but all together were too much for her, and she began to think of a speedy return to the detested school. Phoebe laughed at her woe till the beans danced in the pan, but tried to comfort her by suggesting a means of relief. "Perhaps your uncle will take you away where there ain't any boys. Debbie says he is a real kind man, and always bring heaps of nice things when he comes." "Yes, but you see that is another trouble, for I don't know Uncle Alec at all. He hardly ever came to see us, though he sent me pretty things very often. Now I belong to him, and shall have to mind him till I am 18. I may not like him a bit, and I fret about it all the time." "Well, I wouldn't borrow trouble, but have a real good time. I'm sure I should think I was in clover if I had folks and money, and nothing to do but enjoy myself," began Phoebe, but got no further, for a sudden rush and tumble outside made them both jump. "It's thunder," said Phoebe. "It's a circus," cried Rose, who from her elevated perch had caught glimpses of a gay cart of some sort, and several ponies with flying manes and tails. The sound died away, and the girls were about to continue their confidences, when old Debbie appeared, looking rather cross and sleepy after her nap. "You are wanted in the parlor, Miss Rose. Has anybody come?" "Little girls shouldn't ask questions, but do as they are bid," was all Debbie would answer. "I do hope it isn't Aunt Myra. She always scares me out of my wits asking how my cough is, and groaning over me as if I was going to die," said Rose, preparing to retire the way she came, for the slide, being cut for the admission of bouncing Christmas turkeys and puddings, was plenty large enough for a slender girl. "Guess you'll wish it was Aunt Myra when you see who has come. Don't never let me catch you comin' into my kitchen that way again, or I'll shut you up in the big boiler," growled Debbie, who thought it her duty to snub children on all occasions. Chapter II. The Clan. Rose scrambled into the china closet as rapidly as possible, and there refreshed herself by making faces at Debbie, while she settled her plumage and screwed up her courage. Then she crept softly down the hall and peeped into the parlor. No one appeared, and all was so still she felt sure the company was upstairs. So she skipped boldly through the half-opened folding doors, to behold on the other side a sight that nearly took her breath away. 7 boys stood in a row, all ages, all sizes, all yellow-haired and blue-eyed, all in full Scotch costume, and all smiling, nodding, and saying as if with one voice, "How are you, cousin?" Rose gave a little gasp, and looked wildly about her as if ready to fly, for fear magnified the seven, and the room seemed full of boys. Before she could run, however, the tallest lad stepped out of the line, saying pleasantly, "Don't be frightened. This is the clan come to welcome you, and I'm the chief, Archie, at your service." He held out his hand as he spoke, and Rose timidly put her own into a brown paw, which closed over the white morsel and held it, as the chief continued his introductions. "We came in full rig, for we always turn out in style on grand occasions. Hope you like it. Now I'll tell you who these chaps are, and then we shall be all right. This big one is Prince Charlie, Aunt Clara's boy. She has but one, so he is an extra good one. This old fellow is Mac, the bookworm, called Worm for short. This sweet creature is Steve, the dandy. Look at his gloves and topknot, if you please. They are Aunt Jane's lads, and a precious pair you'd better believe. These are the brats, my brothers, Geordie and Will, and Jamie the baby. Now, my men, step out and show your manners." At this command, to Rose's great dismay, 6 more hands were offered, and it was evident that she was expected to shake them all. It was a trying moment to the bashful child, but, remembering that they were her kinsmen come to welcome her, she tried her best to return the greeting cordially. This impressive ceremony being over, the clan broke ranks, and both rooms instantly appeared to be pervaded with boys. Rose hastily retired to the shelter of a big chair, and sat there watching the invaders, and wondering when her aunt would come and rescue her. As if bound to do their duty manfully, yet rather oppressed by it, each lad paused beside her chair in his wanderings, made a brief remark, received a still briefer answer, and then sheered off with a relieved expression. Archie came first, and, leaning over the chair-back, observed in a paternal tone, "I'm glad you've come, cousin, and I hope you'll find the ant-hill pretty jolly." "I think I shall." Max shook his hair out of his eyes, stumbled over a stool, and asked abruptly, "Did you bring any books with you?" "4 boxes full. They are in the library." Mac vanished from the room, and Steve, striking an attitude which displayed his costume effectively, said with an affable smile, "We were sorry not to see you last Wednesday. I hope your cold is better." "Yes, thank you." And a smile began to dimple about Rose's mouth as she remembered her retreat under the bed-cover. Feeling that he had been received with distinguished marks of attention, Steve strolled away with his topknot higher than ever, and Prince Charlie pranced across the room, saying in a free and easy tone, "Mamma sent her love and hopes you will be well enough to come over for a day next week. It must be desperately dull here for a little thing like you." "I'm 13½ though I do look small," cried Rose, forgetting her shyness in indignation at this insult to her newly acquired teens. "Beg pardon, ma'am, never should have guessed it," and Charlie went off with a laugh, glad to have struck a spark out of his meek cousin. Geordie and Will came together, 2 sturdy 11 and 12-year-olders, and, fixing their round blue eyes on Rose, fired off a question apiece, as if it was a shooting match and she the target. "Did you bring your monkey?" "No, he is dead." "Are you going to have a boat?" "I hope not." Here the 2, with a right-about-face movement, abruptly marched away, and little Jamie demanded with childish frankness, "Did you bring me anything nice?" "Yes, lots of candy," answered Rose, whereupon Jamie ascended into her lap with a sounding kiss and the announcement that he liked her very much. This proceeding rather startled Rose, for the other lads looked and laughed, and in her confusion she said hastily to the young usurper, "Did you see the circus go by?" "When? Where?" cried all the boys in great excitement at once. "Just before you came. At least, I thought it was a circus, for I saw a red and black sort of cart and ever so many little ponies, and—" She got no farther, for a general shout made her pause suddenly as Archie explained the joke by saying in the middle of his laugh, "It was our new dog-cart and the Shetland ponies. You'll never hear the last of your circus, cousin." "But there were so many, and they went so fast, and the cart was so very red," began Rose, trying to explain her mistake. "Come and see them all," cried the prince, and before she knew what was happening she was borne away to the barn and tumultuously introduced to 3 shaggy ponies and the gay new dog-cart. She had never visited these regions before, and had her doubts as to the propriety of her being there now, but when she suggested that auntie might not like it, there was a general cry of, "She told us to amuse you, and we can do it ever so much better out here than poking round in the house." "I'm afraid I shall get cold without my sack," began Rose, who wanted to stay, but felt rather out of her element. "No, you won't. We'll fix you," cried the lads, as one clapped his cap on her head. Another tied a rough jacket round her neck by the sleeves, a third neatly smothered her in a carriage blanket, and a fourth threw open the door of the old barouche that stood there, saying with a flourish, "Step in, ma'am, and make yourself comfortable while we show you some fun." So Rose sat in a state of enjoying herself very much, for the lads proceeded to dance a Highland fling with a spirit and skill that made her clap her hands and laugh as she had not done for weeks. "How is that, my lassie?" asked the Prince, coming up all flushed and breathless when the ballet was over. "It was splendid. I never went to the theatre but once, and the dancing was not half so pretty as this. What clever boys you must be," said Rose, smiling upon her kinsmen like a little queen upon her subjects. "Ah, we're a fine lot, and that is only the beginning of our larks. We haven't got the pipes here, or we'd sing for you, play for you a dulcie melody," answered Charlie, looking much elated at her praise. "I did not know we were Scotch. Papa never said anything about it, or seemed to care about Scotland, except to have me sing the old ballads," said Rose, beginning to feel as if she had left America behind her somewhere. "Neither did we till lately. We've been reading Scots novels, and all of a sudden we remembered that our grandfather was a Scotchman, so we hunted up the old stories, got a bagpipe, put on our plaids, and went in, heart and soul, for the glory of the clan. We've been at it some time now, and it's great fun. Our people like it, and I think we are a pretty canny set." Archie said this from the other coach step, where he had perched, while the rest climbed up before and behind to join the chat as they rested. "I'm Fitzjames, and he's Roderick Dhu, and we'll give you the broadsword combat one day. It's a great thing, you'd better believe," added the Prince. "Yes, and you should hear Steve play the pipes. He makes 'em skirl like a good one," cried Will from the box, eager to air the accomplishments of his race. "Mac's the fellow to hunt up the old stories and tell us how to dress right, and pick out rousing bits for us to speak and sing," put in Geordie, saying a good word for the absent Worm. "And what do you and Will do?" asked Rose of Jamie, who sat beside her as if bound to keep her in sight till the promised gift had been handed over. "Oh, I'm the little foot page, and do errands, and Will and Geordie are the troops when we march, and the stags when we hunt, and the traders when we want to cut any heads off." "They are very obliging, I'm sure," said Rose, whereat the utility men beamed with modest pride, and resolved to enact Wallace and Montrose as soon as possible for their cousin's special benefit. "Let's have a game of tag," cried the Prince, swinging himself up to a beam with a sounding slap on Stevie's shoulder. Regardless of his gloves, Dandy tore after him, and the rest swarmed in every direction, as if bent on breaking their necks and dislocating their joints as rapidly as possible. It was a new and astonishing spectacle to Rose, fresh from a prim boarding school, and she watched the active lads with breathless interest, thinking their antics far superior to those of Mops, the dear departed monkey. Will had just covered himself with glory, by pitching off a high loft head first and coming up all right, when Phoebe appeared with a cloak, hood, and rubbers, also a message from Aunt Plenty that Miss Rose was to come in directly. "All right, we'll bring her," answered Archie, issuing some mysterious order, which was so promptly obeyed that, before Rose could get out of the carriage, the boys had caught hold of the pole, and rattled her out of the barn, round the oval, and up to the front door with a cheer that brought 2 caps to an upper window, and caused Debbie to cry aloud from the back porch, "Them harum-scarum boys will certainly be the death of that delicate little creetur." But the delicate little creetur seemed all the better for her trip, and ran up the stairs looking rosy, gay, and dishevelled, to be received with lamentation by Aunt Plenty, who begged her to go and lie down at once. "Oh, please don't." "We have come to tea with our cousin, and we'll be as good as gold if you'll let us stay, auntie," clamored the boys, who not only approved of "our cousin," but had no mind to lose their tea, for Aunt Plenty's name but feebly expressed her bountiful nature. "Well, dears, you can. Only be quiet and let Rose go and take her iron and be made tidy, and then we will see what we can find for supper," said the old lady as she trotted away, followed by a volley of directions for the approaching feast. "Marmalade for me, auntie. Plenty of plum cake, please. Tell Debbie to trot out the baked pears. I'm your man for lemon pie, ma'am. Do have fritters. Rose will like 'em. She'd rather have tarts, I know." When Rose came down, 15 minutes later, with every curl smoothed and her most beruffled apron on, she found the boys loafing about the long hall, and paused on the half-way landing to take an observation, for till now she had not really examined her new-found cousins. There was a strong family resemblance among them, though some of the yellow heads were darker than others, some of the cheeks brown instead of rosy, and the ages varied all the way from 16-year-old Archie to Jamie, who was 10 years younger. None of them were especially comely but the Prince, yet all were hearty, happy-looking lads, and Rose decided that boys were not as dreadful as she had expected to find them. They were all so characteristically employed that she could not help smiling as she looked. Archie and Charlie, evidently great cronies, were pacing up and down, shoulder to shoulder, whistling "Bonnie Dundee." Mac was reading in a corner, with his book close to his near-sighted eyes. Geordie and Will investigating the internal economy of the moon-faced clock, and Jamie lay kicking up his heels on the mat at the foot of the stairs, bent on demanding his sweeties the instant Rose appeared. She guessed his intention, and forestalled his demand by dropping a handful of sugar plums down upon him. At his cry of rapture, the other lads looked up and smiled involuntarily, for the little kinswoman standing there above was a winsome sight, with her shy, soft eyes, bright hair, and laughing face. The black frock reminded them of her loss, and filled the boyish hearts with a kindly desire to be good to "our cousin," who had no longer any home but this. "There she is, as fine as you please," cried Steve, kissing his hands to her. "Come on, Missy, tea is ready," added the Prince encouragingly. "I shall take her in," and Archie offered his arm with great dignity, an honor that made Rose turn as red as a cherry, and long to run upstairs again. It was a merry supper, and the 2 elder boys added much fun by tormenting the rest with dark hints of some interesting event which was about to occur. Something uncommonly fine, they declared it was, but enveloped in the deepest mystery for the present. "Did I ever see it?" asked Jamie. "Not to remember it, but Mac and Steve have, and liked it immensely," answered Archie, thereby causing the 2 mentioned to neglect Debbie's delectable fritters for several minutes, while they cudgelled their brains. "Who will have it first?" asked Will, with his mouth full of marmalade. "Aunt Plenty, I guess." "When will she have it?" demanded Geordie, bouncing in his seat with impatience. "Sometime on Monday." "Heart alive, what is the boy talking about?" cried the old lady from behind the tall urn, which left little to be seen but the topmost bow of her cap. "Doesn't auntie know?" asked a chorus of voices. "No, and that's the best of the joke, for she is desperately fond of it." "What color is it?" asked Rose, joining in the fun. "Blue and brown." "Is it good to eat?" asked Jamie. "Some people think so, but I shouldn't like to try it," answered Charlie, laughing so he split his tea. "Who does it belong to?" put in Steve. Archie and the Prince stared at one another rather blankly for a minute, then Archie answered with a twinkle in the eye that made Charlie explode again, "To Grandfather Campbell." This was a poser, and they gave up the puzzle, though Jamie confided to Rose that he did not think he could live till Monday without knowing what this remarkable thing was. Soon after tea the clan departed, singing "All the Bluebonnets Are Over the Border" at the tops of their voices. "Well, dear, how do you like your cousins?" asked Aunt Plenty, as the last pony frisked round the corner and the din died away. "Pretty well, ma'am, but I like Phoebe better," an answer which caused Aunt Plenty to hold up her hands in despair, and trot away to tell Sister Peace that she never should understand that child, and it was a mercy Alick was coming soon to take the responsibility off their hands. Fatigued by the unusual exertions of the afternoon, Rose curled herself up in the sofa corner to rest and think about the great mystery, little guessing that she was to know first of all. Right in the middle of her meditations she fell asleep, and dreamed she was at home again in her own little bed. She seemed to wake and see her father bending over her, to hear him say, "My little Rose," to answer, "Yes, papa," and then to feel him take her in his arms and kiss her tenderly. So sweet, so real was the dream, that she started up with a cry of joy to find herself in the arms of a brown, bearded man who held her close, and whispered in a voice so like her father's that she clung to him involuntarily. "This is my little girl, and I am Uncle Alec." Chapter 3. Uncles. When Rose woke next morning, she was not sure whether she had dreamed what occurred the night before, or it had actually happened, so she hopped up and dressed, although it was an hour earlier than she usually rose, for she could not sleep any more, being possessed with a strong desire to slip down and see if the big portmanteau and packing cases were really in the hall. She seemed to remember tumbling over them when she went to bed, for all the aunts had sent her off very punctually, because they wanted their pet nephew all to themselves. The sun was shining, and Rose opened her window to let in the soft May air fresh from the sea. As she leaned over her little balcony, watching an early bird get the worm, and wondering how she should like Uncle Alec, she saw a man leap the garden wall and come whistling up the path. At first she thought it was some trespasser, but a second look showed her that it was her uncle returning from an early dip into the sea. She had hardly dared to look at him the night before, because whenever she tried to do so, she always found a pair of keen blue eyes looking at her. Now she could take a good stare at him as he lingered along, looking about him as if glad to see the old place again. A brown, breezy man in a blue jacket, with no hat on the curly head, which he shook now and then like a water dog. Broad-shouldered, alert in his motions, and with a general air of strength and stability about him which pleased Rose, though she could not explain the feeling of comfort it gave her. She had just said to herself, with a sense of relief, "I guess I shall like him, though he looks as if he made people mind," when he lifted his eyes to examine the budding horse-chestnut overhead, and saw the eager face peering down at him. He waved his hand to her, nodded, and called out in a bluff, cheery voice, "You are on deck early, little niece." "I got up to see if you had really come, uncle." "Did you? Well, come down here and make sure of it." "I'm not allowed to go out before breakfast, sir." "Oh, indeed," with a shrug. "Then I'll come aboard and salute," he added, and to Rose's great amazement Uncle Alec went up one of the pillars of the back piazza, hand over hand, stepped across the roof, and swung himself into her balcony, saying, as he landed on the wide balustrade, "Have you any doubts about me now, ma'am?" Rose was so taken aback she could only answer with a smile as she went to meet him. "How does my girl do this morning?" he asked, taking the little gold hand she gave him in both his big warm ones. "Pretty well, thank you, sir." "Ah, but it should be very well. Why isn't it?" "I always wake up with a headache and feel tired." "Don't you sleep well?" "I lie awake a long time, and then I dream, and my sleep does not seem to rest me much." "What do you do all day?" "Oh, I read, and sew a little, and take naps, and sit with auntie." "No running about out of doors, or housework, or riding, hey?" "Aunt Plenty says I'm not strong enough for much exercise. I drive out with her sometimes, but I don't care for it." "I'm not surprised at that," said Uncle Alec, half to himself, adding, in his quick way, "Who have you had to play with?" "No one but Ariadne Blish, and she was such a goose I couldn't bear her. The boys came yesterday, and seemed rather nice, but of course I couldn't play with them." "Why not?" "I'm too old to play with boys." "Not a bit of it. That's just what you need, for you've been mollycoddled too much. They are good lads, and you'll be mixed up with them more or less for years to come, so you may as well be friends and playmates at once. I will look you up some girls also, if I can find a sensible one who is not spoilt by her nonsensical education." "Phoebe is sensible, I'm sure, and I like her, though I only saw her yesterday," cried Rose, waking up suddenly. "And who is Phoebe, if you please?" Rose eagerly told all she knew, and Uncle Alec listened with an odd smile lurking about his mouth, though his eyes were quite sober as he watched the face before him. "I'm glad to see that you are not aristocratic in your tastes, but I don't quite make out why you like this young lady from the poorhouse." You may laugh at me, but I do. I can't tell why, only she seems so happy and busy, and sings so beautifully, and is strong enough to scrub and sweep, and hasn't any troubles to plague her," said Rose, making a funny jumble of reasons in her efforts to explain. "How do you know that?" "Oh, I was telling her about mine, and asked if she had any, and she said no, only I'd like to go to school, and I mean to some day." "So she doesn't call desertion, poverty, and hard work troubles? She's a brave little girl, and I shall be proud to know her," and Uncle Alec gave an approving nod that made Rose wish she had been the one to earn it. "But what are these troubles of yours, child?" he asked after a minute of silence. "Please don't ask me, uncle." "Can't you tell them to me as well as to Phoebe?" Something in his tone made Rose feel that it would be better to speak out and be done with it, so she answered, with sudden color and averted eyes. "The greatest one was losing dear papa." As she said that, Uncle Alec's arm came gently round her, and he drew her to him, saying, in the voice so like papa's, "That is a trouble which I cannot cure, my child, but I shall try to make you feel it less." "What else, dear?" "I am so tired and poorly all the time. I can't do anything I want to, and it makes me cross," sighed Rose, rubbing the aching head like a fretful child. "That we can cure, and we will," said her uncle, with a decided nod that made the curls bob on his head so that Rose saw the gray ones underneath the brown. "Aunt Myra says I have no constitution, and never shall be strong," observed Rose in a pensive tone, as if it was rather a nice thing to be an invalid. "Aunt Myra is an excellent woman, but it is her hobby to believe that every one is tottering on the brink of the grave, and upon my life I believe she is offended if people don't fall into it. We will show her how to make constitutions and turn pale-faced little ghosts into rosy, hearty girls. That's my business, you know," he added more quietly, for his sudden outburst had rather startled Rose. "I had forgotten you were a doctor. I'm glad of it, for I do want to be well. Only I hope you won't give me much medicine, for I've taken quarts already, and it does me no good." As she spoke, Rose pointed to a little table just inside the window, on which appeared a regiment of bottles. "Aha! Now we'll see what mischief these blessed women have been at," and, making a long arm, Dr. Alec set the bottles on the wide railing before him, examined each carefully, smiled over some, frowned over others, and said, as he put down the last, "Now I'll show you the best way to take these messes," and, quick as a flash, he sent one after another smashing down into the posy beds below. "Aunt Plenty won't like it, and Aunt Myra will be angry, for she sent most of them," cried Rose, half frightened and half pleased at such energetic measures. "You are my patient now, and I'll take the responsibility. My way of giving physic is evidently the best, for you look better already," he said, laughing so infectiously that Rose followed suit, saying saucily, "If I don't like your medicines any better than those, I shall throw them into the garden, and then what will you do? When I prescribe such rubbish, I'll give you leave to pitch it overboard as soon as you like. Now what is the next trouble?" "I hoped you would forget to ask." "But how can I help you if I don't know them? Come, let us have number 3. It is very wrong, I suppose, but I do sometimes wish I had not quite so many aunts. They are all very good to me, and I want to please them, but they are so different, I feel sort of pulled to pieces among them," said Rose, trying to express the emotions of a stray chicken with 6 hens all clucking over it at once. Uncle Alec threw back his head and laughed like a boy, for he could entirely understand how the good ladies had each put in her oar and tried to paddle her own way, to the great disturbance of the waters and the entire bewilderment of poor Rose. "I intend to try a course of uncles now, and see how that suits your constitution. I'm going to have you all to myself, and no one is to give a word of advice unless I ask it. There is no other way to keep order aboard, and I am captain of this little craft, for a time at least. What comes next?" But Rose stuck there, and grew so red her uncle guessed what the trouble was. "I don't think I can tell this one. It wouldn't be polite, and I feel pretty sure that it isn't going to be a trouble any more." As she blushed and stammered over these words, Dr. Alec turned his eyes away to the distant sea, and said, so seriously, so tenderly, that she felt every word and long remembered them, My child, I don't expect you to love and trust me all at once, but I do want you to believe that I shall give my whole heart to this new duty, and if I make mistakes, as I probably shall, no one will grieve over them more bitterly than I. It is my fault that I am a stranger to you, when I want to be your best friend. That is one of my mistakes, and I never repented it more deeply than I do now. Your father and I had a trouble once, and I thought I could never forgive him, so I kept away for years. Thank God, we made it all up the last time I saw him, and he told me then that if he was forced to leave her, he should bequeath his little girl to me as a token of his love. I can't fill his place, but I shall try to be a father to her, and if she learns to love me half as well as she did the good one she has lost, I shall be a proud and happy man. Will she believe this, and try?" Something in Uncle Alec's face touched Rose to the heart, and when he held out his hand with that anxious, troubled look in his eyes, she was moved to put up her innocent lips and seal the contract with a confiding kiss. The strong arm held her close a minute, and she felt the broad chest heave once, as if with a great sigh of relief, but not a word was spoken till a tap at the door made both start. Rose popped her head through the window to say, "Come in," while Dr. Alec hastily rubbed the sleeve of his jacket across his eyes and began to whistle again. Phoebe appeared with a cup of coffee. "Debbie told me to bring this and help you get up," she said, opening her black eyes wide, as if she wondered how on earth the sailor man got there. "I'm all dressed, so I don't need any help. I hope that is good and strong," added Rose, eyeing the steaming cup with an eager look. But she did not get it, for a brown hand took possession of it, as her uncle said quickly, "Hold hard, my lass, and let me overhaul that dose before you take it. Do you drink all this strong coffee every morning, Rose?" "Yes, sir, and I like it. Auntie says it tones me up, and I always feel better after it." "This accounts for the sleepless nights, the flutter your heart gets into at the least start, and this is why that cheek of yours is pale yellow instead of rosy red. No more coffee for you, my dear, and by you'll see that I am right." "Any new milk downstairs, Phoebe?" "Yes, sir, plenty right in from the barn." "That's the drink for my patient. Go bring me a pitcherful, and another cup. I want a draught myself. This won't hurt the honeysuckles, for they have no nerves to speak of, and, to Rose's great discomfort, the coffee went after the medicine." Dr. Alec saw the injured look she put on, but took no notice, and presently banished it by saying pleasantly, "I've got a capital little cup among my traps, and I'll give it to you to drink your milk in, as it is made of wood that is supposed to improve whatever is put into it, something like a quassia cup. That reminds me, one of the boxes Phoebe wanted to lug upstairs last night is for you." Knowing that I was coming home to find a ready-made daughter, I picked up all sorts of odd and pretty trifles along the way, hoping she would be able to find something she liked among them all. Early tomorrow we'll have a grand rummage. Here's our milk. I propose the health of Miss Rose Campbell, and drink it with all my heart." It was impossible for Rose to pout with the prospect of a delightful boxful of gifts dancing before her eyes, so, in spite of herself, she smiled as she drank her own health, and found that fresh milk was not a hard dose to take. "Now I must be off before I am caught again with my wig in a toss," said Dr. Alec, preparing to descend the way he came. "Do you always go in and out like a cat, uncle?" asked Rose, much amused at his odd ways. "I used to sneak out of my window when I was a boy, so I need not disturb the ants, and now I rather like it, for it's the shortest road, and it keeps me limber when I have no rigging to climb. Good-bye till breakfast." And away he went down the waterspout, over the roof, and vanished among the budding honeysuckles below. "Ain't he a funny Gardine?" exclaimed Phoebe, as she went off with the cups. "He is a very kind one, I think," answered Rose, following, to prowl around the big boxes and try to guess which was hers. When her uncle appeared at the sound of the bell, he found her surveying with an anxious face a new dish that smoked on the table. "Got a fresh trouble, Rosie?" he asked, stroking her smooth head. "Uncle, are you going to make me eat oatmeal?" asked Rose, in a tragic tone. "Don't you like it?" "I detest it," answered Rose, with all the emphasis which a turned-up nose, a shudder, and a groan could give to the three words. "You are not a true Scotchwoman if you don't like the parritch. It's a pity, for I made it myself, and thought we'd have such a good time with all that cream to float it in. Well, never mind." And he sat down with a disappointed air. Rose had made up her mind to be obstinate about it, because she did heartily detest the dish; but as Uncle Alec did not attempt to make her obey, she suddenly changed her mind and thought she would. "I'll try to eat it to please you, uncle, but people are always saying how wholesome it is, and that makes me hate it," she said, half ashamed at her silly excuse. "I do want you to like it, because I wish my girl to be as well and strong as Jessie's boys, who are brought up on this in the good old fashion. No hot bread and fried stuff for them, and they are the biggest and bonniest lads of the lot. Bless you, auntie, and good morning." Dr. Alec turned to greet the old lady, and, with a firm resolve to eat or die in the attempt, Rose sat down. In 5 minutes she forgot what she was eating, so interested was she in the chat that went on. It amused her very much to hear Aunt Plenty call her 40-year-old nephew "my dear boy," and Uncle Alec was so full of lively gossip about all creation in general, and the ant hill in particular, that the detested porridge vanished without a murmur. "You will go to church with us, I hope, Alec, if you are not too tired," said the old lady, when breakfast was over. "I came all the way from Calcutta for that express purpose, ma'am. Only I must send the sisters word of my arrival, for they don't expect me till to-morrow, you know, and there will be a row in church if those boys see me without warning. I'll send Ben up the hill, and you can step over to Myra's yourself. It will please her, and you have plenty of time." Dr. Alec was off at once, and they saw no more of him till the old barouche was at the door, and Aunt Plenty just rustling downstairs in her Sunday best, with Rose like a little black shadow behind her. Away they drove in state, and all the way Uncle Alec's hat was more off his head than on, for every one they met smiled and bowed, and gave him as blithe a greeting as the day permitted. It was evident that the warning had been a wise one, for, in spite of time and place, the lads were in such a ferment that their elders sat in momentary dread of an unseemly outbreak somewhere. It was simply impossible to keep those 14 eyes off Uncle Alec, and the dreadful things that were done during sermon time will hardly be believed. Rose dared not look up after a while, for these bad boys vented their emotions upon her till she was ready to laugh and cry with mingled amusement and vexation. Charlie winked rapturously at her behind his mother's fan. Mac openly pointed to the tall figure beside her. Jamie stared fixedly over the back of his pew, till Rose thought his round eyes would drop out of his head. George fell over a stool and dropped 3 books in his excitement. Will drew sailors and Chinamen on his clean cuffs and displayed them, to Rose's great tribulation. Steve nearly upset the whole party by burning his nose with salts, as he pretended to be overcome by his joy. Even dignified Archie disgraced himself by writing in his hymn book, "Isn't he blue and brown?" and passing it politely to Rose. Her only salvation was trying to fix her attention upon Uncle Mac, a portly, placid gentleman, who seemed entirely unconscious of the iniquities of the clan, and dozed peacefully in his pew corner. This was the only Uncle Rose had met for years, for Uncle Jem and Uncle Steve, the husbands of Aunt Jessie and Aunt Clara, were at sea, and Aunt Myra was a widow. Uncle Mac was a merchant, very rich and busy, and as quiet as a mouse at home. For he was in such a minority among the womenfolk, he dared not open his lips and let his wife rule undisturbed. Rose liked the big, kindly, silent man who came to her when papa died. He was always sending her splendid boxes of goodies at school, and often invited her into his great warehouse, full of teas and spices, wines, and all sorts of foreign fruits, there to eat and carry away whatever she liked. She had secretly regretted that he was not to be her guardian, but since she had seen Uncle Alec she felt better about it, for she did not particularly admire Aunt Jane. When church was over, Dr. Alec got into the porch as quickly as possible, and there the young bears had a hug all round, while the sisters shook hands and welcomed him with bright faces and glad hearts. Rose was nearly crushed flat behind a door, in that dangerous passage from pew to porch, but Uncle Mac rescued her, and put her into the carriage for safe keeping. "Now, girls, I want you to come and dine with Alec. Mac also, of course. But I cannot ask the boys, for we did not expect this dear fellow until to-morrow, you know, so I made no preparations. Send the lads home, and let them wait till Monday, for really I was shocked at their behavior in church," said Aunt Plenty, as she followed Rose. In any other place the defrauded boys would have set up a howl. As it was, they growled and protested till Dr. Alex settled the matter by saying, "Never mind, old chaps. I'll make it up to you to morrow, if you sheer off quietly. If you don't, not a blessed thing shall you have out of my big boxes." Chapter IV. Ants. All dinner time, Rose felt that she was going to be talked about, and afterwards she was sure of it, for Aunt Plenty whispered to her as they went into the parlor, "Run up and sit a while with Sister Peace, my dear. She likes to have you read while she rests, and we are going to be busy." Rose obeyed, and the quiet rooms above were so like a church that she soon composed her ruffled feelings, and was unconsciously a little minister of happiness to the sweet old lady, who for years had sat there patiently, waiting to be set free from pain. Rose knew the sad romance of her life, and it gave a certain tender charm to this great aunt of hers, whom she already loved. When Peace was 20, she was about to be married. All was done. The wedding dress lay ready, the flowers were waiting to put on, the happy hour at hand, when word came that the lover was dead. They thought that gentle Peace would die too, but she bore it bravely, put away her bridal gear, took up life afresh, and lived on, a beautiful, meek woman, with hair as white as snow, and cheeks that never bloomed again. She wore no black, but soft, pale colors, as if always ready for the marriage that had never come. For 30 years she had lived on, fading slowly, but cheerful, busy, and full of interest in all that went on in the family, especially the joys and sorrows of the young girls growing up about her, and to them she was adviser, confidant, and friend in all their tender trials and delights. A truly beautiful old maiden, with her silvery hair, tranquil face, and an atmosphere of repose about her that soothed whoever came to her. Aunt Plenty was utterly dissimilar, being a stout, brisk old lady, with a sharp eye, a lively tongue, and a face like a winter apple. Always trotting, chatting, and bustling, she was a regular Martha, cumbered with the cares of this world, and quite happy in them. Rose was right, and while she softly read psalms to Aunt Peace, the other ladies were talking about her little self in the frankest manner. "Well, Alec, how do you like your ward?" began Aunt Jane, as they all settled down, and Uncle Mac deposited himself in a corner to finish his doze. "I should like her better if I could have begun at the beginning, and so got a fair start. Poor George led such a solitary life that the child has suffered in many ways, and since he died she has been going on worse than ever, judging from the state I find her in." "My dear boy, we did what we thought best while waiting for you to wind up your affairs and get home. I always told George he was wrong to bring her up as he did, but he never took my advice, and now here we are, with this poor dear child upon our hands. I, for one, freely confess that I don't know what to do with her, any more than if she was one of those strange, outlandish birds you used to bring home from foreign parts." And Aunt Plenty gave a perplexed shake of the head, which caused great commotion among the stiff loops of purple ribbon that bristled all over the cap like crocus buds. If my advice had been taken, she would have remained at the excellent school where I placed her, but our aunt thought best to remove her because she complained, and she has been dawdling about ever since she came. "A most ruinous state of things for a morbid, spoilt girl like Rose," said Mrs. Jane, severely. She had never forgiven the old ladies for yielding to Rose's pathetic petition that she might wait her guardian's arrival before beginning another term at the school, which was a regular Blimber hotbed, and turned out many a feminine toots. "I never thought it the proper school for a child in good circumstances, an heiress, in fact, as Rose is. It is all very well for girls who are to get their own living by teaching, and that sort of thing, but all she needs is a year or two at a fashionable finishing school, so that at 18 she can come out with éclat," put in Aunt Clara, who had been a beauty and a belle, and was still a handsome woman. "Dear, dear! How short-sighted you all are, to be discussing education and plans for the future, when this unhappy child is so plainly marked for the tomb," sighed Aunt Myra, with a lugubrious sniff and a solemn wag of the funereal bonnet, which she refused to remove, being afflicted with a chronic catarrh. "Now, it is my opinion that the dear thing only wants freedom, rest, and care. There is a look in her eyes that goes to my heart, for it shows that she feels the need of what none of us can give her, a mother," said Aunt Jessie, with tears in her own bright eyes at the thought of her boys being left, as Rose was, to the care of others. Uncle Alec, who had listened silently as each spoke, turned quickly towards the last sister, and said, with a decided nod of approval, "You've got it, Jessie, and with you to help me, I hope to make the child feel that she is not quite fatherless and motherless." "I'll do my best, Alec, and I think you will need me. For, wise as you are, you cannot understand a tender, timid little creature like Rose as a woman can," said Mrs. Jessie, smiling back at him with a heart full of motherly goodwill. "I cannot help feeling that I, who have had a daughter of my own, can best bring up a girl, and I am very much surprised that George did not entrust her to me," observed Aunt Myra, with an air of melancholy importance, for she was the only one who had given a daughter to the family, and she felt that she had distinguished herself, though ill-natured people said that she had dosed her darling to death. "I never blamed him in the least, when I remember the perilous experiments you tried with poor Carrie," began Mrs. Jane, in her hard voice. "Jane Campbell, I will not hear a word. My sainted Caroline is a sacred object," cried Aunt Myra, rising as if to leave the room. Dr. Alec detained her, feeling that he must define his position at once, and maintain it manfully if he hoped to have any success in his new undertaking. "Now, my dear souls, don't let us quarrel and make Rose a bone of contention, though, upon my word, she is almost a bone, poor lass. You have had her among you for a year, and done what you liked. I cannot say that your success is great, but that is owing to too many fingers in the pie. Now I intend to try my way for a year, and if at the end of it she is not in better trim than now, I'll give up the case, and hand her over to some one else. That's fair, I think. She will not be here a year hence, poor darling, so no one need dread future responsibility," said Aunt Myra, folding her black gloves as if all ready for the funeral. "By Jupiter, Myra, you are enough to damp the ardor of a saint," cried Dr. Alec, with a sudden spark in his eyes. "Your croaking will worry that child out of her wits, for she is an imaginative puss, and will fret and fancy untold horrors. You have put it into her head that she has no constitution, and she rather likes the idea. If she had not had a pretty good one, she would have been marked for the tomb by this time, at the rate you have been going on with her. I will not have any interference, please understand that, so just wash your hands of her, and let me manage till I want help. Then I'll ask for it." "Hear, hear," came from the corner, where Uncle Mac was apparently wrapped in slumber. "You were appointed guardian, so we can do nothing. But I predict that the girl will be spoilt, utterly spoilt," answered Mrs. Jane, grimly. "Thank you, sister. I have an idea that if a woman can bring up two boys as perfectly as you do yours, a man, if he devotes his whole mind to it, may at least attempt as much with one girl," replied Dr. Alec, with a humorous look that tickled the others immensely, for it was a well-known fact in the family that Jane's boys were more indulged than all the other lads put together. "I am quite easy, for I really do think that Alec will improve the child's health, and by the time his year is out it will be quite soon enough for her to go to Madame Roccabella's and be finished off," said Aunt Clara, settling her rings, and thinking, with languid satisfaction, of the time when she could bring out a pretty and accomplished niece. "I suppose you will stay here in the old place, unless you think of marrying, and it's high time you did," put in Mrs. Jane, much nettled at her brother's last hit. "No, thank you. Come and have a cigar, Mac," said Dr. Alec, abruptly. "Don't marry. Women enough in the family already," muttered Uncle Mac, and then the gentleman hastily fled. "Aunt Peace would like to see you all, she says," was the message Rose brought before the ladies could begin again. "Hectic, hectic, dear me," murmured Aunt Myra, as the shadow of her gloomy bonnet fell upon Rose, and the stiff tips of a black glove touched the cheek where the color deepened under so many eyes. "I'm glad these pretty curls are natural. They will be invaluable by and by," said Aunt Clara, taking an observation with her head on one side. "Now that your uncle has come, I no longer expect you to review the studies of the past year. I trust your time will not be entirely wasted in frivolous sports, however," added Aunt Jane, sailing out of the room with the air of a martyr. Aunt Jessie said not a word, but kissed her little niece with a look of tender sympathy that made Rose cling to her a minute, and follow her with grateful eyes as the door closed behind her. After everybody had gone home, Dr. Alec paced up and down the lower hall in the twilight for an hour, thinking so intently that sometimes he frowned, sometimes he smiled, and more than once he stood still in a brown study. All of a sudden he said, half aloud, as if he had made up his mind, "I might as well begin at once, and give the child something new to think about, for Myra's dismals and Jane's lectures have made her as blue as a little indigo bag." Diving into one of the trunks that stood in a corner, he brought up, after a brisk rummage, a silken cushion prettily embroidered, and a quaint cup of dark carved wood. "This will do for a start," he said, as he plumped up the cushion and dusted the cup. "It won't do to begin too energetically, or Rose will be frightened. I must beguile her gently and pleasantly along till I've won her confidence, and then she will be ready for anything." Just then Phoebe came out of the dining room with a plate of brown bread, for Rose had been allowed no hot biscuit for tea. "I'll relieve you of some of that," said Dr. Alec, and helping himself to a generous slice, he retired to the study, leaving Phoebe to wonder at his appetite. She would have wondered still more if she had seen him making that brown bread into neat little pills, which he packed into an ivory box, out of which he emptied his own bits of lovage. "There! If they insist on medicine, I'll order these, and no harm will be done. I will have my own way, but I'll keep the peace if possible, and confess the joke when my experiment has succeeded," he said to himself, looking very much like a mischievous boy, as he went on with his innocent prescriptions. Rose was playing softly on the small organ that stood in the upper hall, so that Aunt Peace could enjoy it, and all the while he talked with the old ladies, Uncle Alec was listening to the fitful music of the child, and thinking of another Rose who used to play for him. As the clock struck 8, he called out, "Time for my girl to be abed, else she won't be up early, and I'm full of jolly plans for tomorrow. Come and see what I've found for you to begin upon." Rose ran in and listened with a bright attentive face, while Dr. Alec said impressively, "In my wanderings over the face of the earth, I have picked up some excellent remedies, and as they are rather agreeable ones, I think you and I will try them. This is a herb pillow, given to me by a wise old woman when I was ill in India. It is filled with saffron, poppies, and other soothing plants, so lay your little head on it tonight, sleep sweetly without a dream, and wake tomorrow without a pain." "Shall I really? How nice it smells!" and Rose willingly received the pretty pillow, and stood enjoying its faint, sweet odor as she listened to the doctor's next remedy. "This is the cup I told you of. Its virtue depends, they say, on the drinker filling it himself, so you must learn to milk. I'll teach you." "I'm afraid I never can," said Rose, but she surveyed the cup with favor, for a funny little imp danced on the handle, as if all ready to take a header into the white sea below. "Don't you think she ought to have something more strengthening than milk, Alec? I really shall feel anxious if she does not have a tonic of some sort," said Aunt Plenty, eyeing the new remedies suspiciously, for she had more faith in her old-fashioned doses than all the magic cups and poppy pillows of the East. "Well, ma'am, I'm willing to give her a pill if you think best. It is a very simple one, and very large quantities may be taken without harm. You know hasheesh is the extract of hemp? Well, this is a preparation of corn and rye, much used in the old times, and I hope it will be again." "Dear me, how singular!" said Aunt Plenty, bringing her spectacles to bear upon the pills, with a face so full of respectful interest that it was almost too much for Dr. Alec's gravity. "Take one in the morning, and a good night to you, my dear," he said, dismissing his patient with a hearty kiss. Then, as she vanished, he put both hands into his hair, exclaiming, with a comical mixture of anxiety and amusement, "When I think what I have undertaken, I declare to you, Aunt, I feel like running away and not coming back till Rose is 18." Chapter 5. A Belt and a Box. When Rose came out of her chamber, cup in hand, next morning, the first person she saw was Uncle Alec, standing on the threshold of the room opposite, which he appeared to be examining with care. When he heard her step, he turned about and began to sing. "Where are you going, my pretty maid?" "I'm going a milking, sir," she said, answered Rose, waving the cup, and then they finished the verse together in fine style. Before either spoke, a head, in a nightcap so large and beruffled that it looked like a cabbage, popped out of a room farther down the hall, and an astonished voice exclaimed, "What in the world are you doing about so early?" "Clearing our pipes for the day, ma'am. Look here, auntie, can I have this room?" said Dr. Alec, making her a sailor's bow. "Any room you like, except sister's." "Thanks. And may I go rummaging about in the garrets and glory holes to furnish it as I like?" "My dear boy, you may turn the house upside down if you will only stay in it." "That's a handsome offer, I'm sure. I'll stay, ma'am. Here's my little anchor, so you will get more than you want of me this time." "That's impossible. Put on your jacket, Rose. Don't tire her out with antics, Alex." "Yes, sister, I'm coming." And the cabbage vanished suddenly. The first milking lesson was a droll one, but after several scares and many vain attempts, Rose at last managed to fill her cup, while Ben held Clover's tail so that it could not flap, and Dr. Alec kept her from turning to stare at the new milkmaid, who objected to both these proceedings very much. "You look chilly in spite of all this laughing. Take a smart run round the garden and get up a glow," said the doctor, as they left the barn. "I'm too old for running, uncle. Miss Power said it was not ladylike for girls in their teens," answered Rose, primly. "I take the liberty of differing from Madame Prunes and Prisms, and, as your physician, I order you to run. Off with you," said Uncle Alec, with a look and a gesture that made Rose scurry away as fast as she could go. Anxious to please him, she raced round the beds till she came back to the porch where he stood, and, dropping down upon the steps, she sat panting, with cheeks as rosy as the rigolette on her shoulders. "Very well done, child. I see you have not lost the use of your limbs, though you are in your teens. That belt is too tight. Unfasten it, then you can take a long breath without panting so." "It isn't tight, sir. I can breathe perfectly well," began Rose, trying to compose herself. Her uncle's only answer was to lift her up and unhook the new belt of which she was so proud. The moment the clasp was open, the belt flew apart several inches, for it was impossible to restrain the involuntary sigh of relief that flatly contradicted her words. "Why, I didn't know it was tight. It didn't feel so a bit. Of course it would open if I puff like this, but I never do, because I hardly ever run," explained Rose, rather discomfited by this discovery. "I see you don't half fill your lungs, and so you can wear this absurd thing without feeling it. The idea of cramping a tender little waist in a stiff band of leather and steel, just when it ought to be growing," said Dr. Alec, surveying the belt with great disfavor as he put the clasp forward several holes, to Rose's secret dismay, for she was proud of her slender figure, and daily rejoiced that she wasn't as stout as Luly Miller, a former classmate who vainly tried to repress her plumpness. "It will fall off if it is so loose," she said anxiously, as she stood watching him pull her precious belt about. "Not if you keep taking long breaths to hold it on. This is what I want you to do, and when you have filled this out we will go on enlarging it, till your waist is more like that of Hebe, goddess of health, and less like that of a fashion plate, the ugliest thing imaginable." "How it does look!" and Rose gave a glance of scorn at the loose belt hanging round her trim little waist. "It will be lost, and then I shall feel badly, for it cost ever so much, and is real steel and Russia leather. Just smell how nice." "If it is lost, I'll give you a better one. A soft silken sash is much fitter for a pretty child like you than a plaited harness like this, and I've got no end of Italian scarves and Turkish sashes among my traps. Ah, that makes you feel better, doesn't it?" and he pinched the cheek that had suddenly dimpled with a smile. "It is very silly of me, but I can't help liking to know that—" Here she stopped and blushed, and held down her head, ashamed to add, "You think I am pretty." Dr. Alec's eyes twinkled, but he said very soberly, "Rose, are you vain?" "I'm afraid I am," answered a very meek voice from behind the veil of hair that hid the red face. "That is a sad fault," and he sighed as if grieved at the confession. "I know it is, and I try not to be, but people praise me, and I can't help liking it, for I really don't think I'm repulsive." The last word, and the funny tone in which it was uttered, were too much for Dr. Alec, and he laughed in spite of himself, to Rose's great relief. "I quite agree with you, and in order that you may be still less repulsive, I want you to grow as fine a girl as Phoebe." "Phoebe!" and Rose looked so amazed that her uncle nearly went off again. "Yes, Phoebe, for she has what you need, health. If you dear little girls would only learn what real beauty is, and not pinch and starve and bleach yourselves out so, you'd save an immense deal of time and money and pain. A happy soul in a healthy body makes the best sort of beauty for man or woman. Do you understand that, my dear?" "Yes, sir," answered Rose, much taken down by this comparison with the girl from the poorhouse. It nettled her sadly, and she showed that it did, by saying quickly, "I suppose you would like to have me sweep and scrub, and wear an old brown dress, and go round with my sleeves rolled up, as Phoebe does?" "I should very much if you could work as well as she does, and show as strong a pair of arms as she can. I haven't seen a prettier picture for some time than she made of herself this morning, up to the elbows in suds, singing like a blackbird whilst she scrubbed on the back stoop." "Well, I do think you are the queerest man that ever lived," was all Rose could find to say after this display of bad taste. "I haven't begun to show you my oddities yet, so you must make up your mind to worse shocks than this," he said, with such a whimsical look that she was glad the sound of a bell prevented her showing more plainly what a blow her little vanities had already received. "You will find your box all open up in Auntie's parlor, and there you can amuse her and yourself by rummaging to your heart's content. I've got to be cruising round all the morning getting my room to rights," said Dr. Alec, as they rose from breakfast. "Can't I help you, uncle?" asked Rose, quite burning to be useful. "No, thank you. I'm going to borrow Phoebe for a while, if Aunt Plenty can spare her." "Anybody, anything, Alec. You will want me, I know, so I'll give orders about dinner and be all ready to lend a hand," and the old lady bustled away, full of interest and goodwill. "Uncle will find that I can do some things that Phoebe can't, so now," thought Rose, with a toss of her head as she flew to Aunt Peace and the long-desired box. Every little girl can easily imagine what an extra good time she had diving into a sea of treasures and fishing up one pretty thing after another, till the air was full of the mingled odors of musk and sandalwood, the room gay with bright colors, and Rose in a rapture of delight. She began to forgive Dr. Alec for the oatmeal diet when she saw a lovely ivory work-box, became resigned to the state of her belt when she found a pile of rainbow-colored sashes, and when she came to some distractingly pretty bottles of attar of rose, she felt that they almost atoned for the great sin of thinking Phoebe the finer girl of the two. Dr. Alec, meanwhile, had apparently taken Aunt Plenty at her word, and was turning the house upside down. A general revolution was evidently going on in the green room, for the dark damask curtains were seen bundling away in Phoebe's arms, the air-tight stove retiring to the cellar on Ben's shoulder, and the great bedstead going up garret in a fragmentary state, escorted by 3 bearers. Aunt Plenty was constantly on the trot among her storerooms, camphor chests, and linen closets, looking as if the new order of things both amazed and amused her. Half the peculiar performances of Dr. Alec cannot be revealed, but as Rose glanced up from her box, now and then she caught glimpses of him striding by, bearing a bamboo chair, a pair of ancient andirons, a queer Japanese screen, a rug or two, and finally a large bathing pan upon his head. "What a curious room it will be," she said, as she sat resting and refreshing herself with lumps of delight all the way from Cairo. "I fancy you will like it, dearie," answered Aunt Peace, looking up with a smile from some pretty trifles she was making, with blue silk and white muslin. Rose did not see the smile, for just at that moment her uncle paused at the door, and she sprang up to dance before him, saying, with a face full of childish happiness, "Look at me! Look at me! I'm splendid I don't know myself. I haven't put these things on right, I dare say, but I do like them so much." You look as gay as a parrot in your fez and cabaja, and it does my heart good to see the little black shadow turned into a rainbow," said Uncle Alec, surveying the bright figure before him with great approbation. He did not say it, but he thought she made a much prettier picture than Phoebe at the washtub, for she had stuck a purple fez on her blonde head, tied several brilliant scarfs about her waist, and put on a truly gorgeous scarlet jacket with a golden sun embroidered on the back, a silver moon on the front, and stars of all sizes on the sleeves. A pair of Turkish slippers adorned her feet, and necklaces of amber, coral, and filigree hung about her neck, while one hand held a smelling bottle, and the other the spicy box of Oriental sweetmeats. "I feel like a girl in the Arabian Nights, and expect to find a magic carpet or a wonderful talisman somewhere. Only I don't see how I ever can thank you for all these lovely things," she said, stopping her dance as if suddenly oppressed with gratitude. "I'll tell you how. By leaving off the black clothes that never should have been kept so long on such a child, and wearing the gay ones I've brought. It will do your spirits good, and cheer up this sober old house, won't it, auntie?" "I think you are right, Alec, and it is fortunate that we have not begun on her spring clothes yet, for Myra thought she ought not to wear anything brighter than violet, and she is too pale for that. You just let me direct Miss Hemming how to make some of these things. You will be surprised to see how much I know about piping hems and gathering armholes and shirring biases," began Dr. Alec, patting a pile of muslin cloth and silk with a knowing air. Aunt Peace and Rose laughed so hard he could not display his knowledge any farther, till they stopped, when he said good-naturedly, "That will do a great way towards filling out the belt, so laugh away, Morgiana, and I'll go back to my work, or I never shall be done." "I couldn't help it. Shirred biases were so very funny," Rose said, as she turned to her box after the splendid laugh. "But really, auntie," she added soberly, "I feel as if I ought not to have so many nice things. I suppose it wouldn't do to give Phoebe some of them. Uncle might not like it." "He would not mind, but they are not suitable for Phoebe. Some of the dresses you are done with would be more useful, if they can be made over to fit her," answered Aunt Peace in the prudent, moderate tone which is so trying to our feelings when we indulge in little fits of charitable enthusiasm. "I'd rather give her new ones, for I think she is a little proud and might not like old things. If she was my sister it would do, because sisters don't mind, but she isn't, and that makes it bad, you see. I know how I can manage beautifully. I'll adopt her," and Rose looked quite radiant with this new idea. "I'm afraid you could not do it legally till you are older, but you might see if she likes the plan, and at any rate you can be very kind to her, for in one sense we are all sisters, and should help one another." The sweet old face looked at her so kindly that Rose was fired with a desire to settle the matter at once, and rushed away to the kitchen, just as she was. Phoebe was there, polishing up the antique andirons so busily that she started when a voice cried out, "Smell that! Taste this! And look at me!" Phoebe sniffed at her of Rose, crunched the lump of delight tucked into her mouth, and stared with all her eyes at little Morgiana, prancing about the room like a brilliant parakeet. "My stars, ain't you splendid!" was all she could say, holding up two dusty hands. "I've got heaps of lovely things upstairs, and I'll show them all to you, and I'd go halves, only auntie think they wouldn't be useful, so I shall give you something else, and you won't mind, will you? Because I want to adopt you as Arabella was in the story. Won't that be nice?" "Why, Miss Rose, have you lost your wits?" No wonder Phoebe asked, for Rose talked very fast and looked so odd in her new costume, and was so eager she could not stop to explain. Seeing Phoebe's bewilderment, she quieted down and said, with a pretty air of earnestness, "It isn't fair that I should have so much and you so little, and I want to be as good to you as if you were my sister, for Aunt Peace says we are all sisters, really. I thought if I adopted you as much as I can now, it would be nicer. Will you let me, please?" To Rose's great surprise, Phoebe sat down on the floor and hid her face in her apron for a minute without answering a word. "Oh dear, now she's offended, and I don't know what to do," thought Rose, much discouraged by this reception of her offer. "Please forgive me. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, and hope you won't think—" She faltered presently, feeling that she must undo the mischief if possible. But Phoebe gave her another surprise by dropping the apron and showing a face all smiles, in spite of tears in the eyes, as she put both arms round Rose and said, with a laugh and a sob, "I think you are the dearest girl in the world, and I'll let you do anything you like with me." "Then you do like the plan? You didn't cry because I seemed to be kind of patronizing? I truly didn't mean it to be," cried Rose, delighted. "I guess I do like it, and cried because no one was ever so good to me before, and I couldn't help it. As for patronizing, you may walk on me if you want to, and I won't mind," said Phoebe in a burst of gratitude, for the words "We are sisters" went straight to her lonely heart and nestled there. "Well, now we can play I'm a good sprite out of the box, or what is better, a fairy godmother come down the chimney, and you are Cinderella, and must say what you want," said Rose, trying to put the question delicately. Phoebe understood that, for she had a good deal of natural refinement, though she did come from the poorhouse. "I don't feel as if I wanted anything now, Miss Rose, but to find some way of thanking you for all you've done," she said, rubbing off a tear that went rolling down the bridge of her nose in the most unromantic way. "Why, I haven't done anything but given you a bit of candy. Here, have some more, and eat 'em while you work, and think what I can do. I must go and clear up, so good bye, and don't forget I've adopted you. You've given me sweeter things than candy, and I'm not likely to forget it." And, carefully wiping off the brick dust, Phoebe pressed the little hand Rose offered warmly in both her hard ones, and the black eyes followed the departing visitor with a grateful look that made them very soft and bright. Chapter 6. Uncle Alec's Room. Soon after dinner, and before she had got acquainted with half her new possessions, Dr. Alec proposed a drive to carry round the first installment of gifts to the aunts and cousins. Rose was quite ready to go, being anxious to try a certain soft burnous from the box, which not only possessed a most engaging little hood, but had funny tassels bobbing in all directions. The big carriage was full of parcels, and even Ben's seat was loaded with Indian war clubs, a Chinese kite of immense size, and a pair of polished ox horns from Africa. Uncle Alec, very blue as to his clothes and very brown as to his face, sat bolt upright, surveying well-known places with interest, while Rose, feeling unusually elegant and comfortable, leaned back, folded in her soft mantle, and played she was an Eastern princess making a royal progress among her subjects. At 3 of the places their calls were brief, for Aunt Myra's catarrh was unusually bad. Aunt Clara had a roomful of company, and Aunt Jane showed such a tendency to discuss the population, productions, and politics of Europe, Asia, and Africa, that even Dr. Alec was dismayed, and got away as soon as possible. "Now we will have a good time. I do hope the boys will be at home," said Rose, with a sigh of relief, as they wound yet higher up the hill to Aunt Jessie's. "I left this for the last call, so that we might find the lads just in from school. Yes, there is Jamie on the gate watching for us. Now you'll see the clan gather. They are always swarming about together." The instant Jamie saw the approaching guests, he gave a shrill whistle, which was answered by echoes from meadow, house, and barn, as the cousins came running from all directions, shouting, "Hooray for Uncle Alec!" They went at the carriage like highwaymen, robbed it of every parcel, took the occupants prisoners, and marched them into the house with great exultation. Little Mum, here they are with lots of goodies. Come down and see the fun right away, quick!" bawled Will and Geordie, amidst a general ripping off of papers and a reckless cutting of strings that soon turned the tidy room into a chaos. Down came Aunt Jessie, with her pretty cap half on, but such a beaming face below it that one rather thought the fly-away headgear an improvement than otherwise. She had hardly time to greet Rose and the doctor before the boys were about her, each clamoring for her to see his gift and rejoice over it with him, for little Mum went halves in everything. The great horns skirmished about her, as if to toss her to the ceiling. The war clubs hurtled over her head, as if to annihilate her, and an amazing medley from 4 quarters of the globe filled her lap, and 7 excited boys all talked to her at once. But she liked it, oh dear, yes, and sat smiling, admiring, and explaining, quite untroubled by the din, which made Rose cover up her ears, and Dr. Aleck threaten instant flight if the riot was not quelled. That threat produced a lull, and while the uncle received thanks in one corner, the aunt had some little confidences made to her in the other. "Well, dear, and how are things going with you now? Better, I hope, than they were a week ago." "Aunt Jessie, I think I'm going to be very happy now uncle has come. He does the queerest things, but he is so good to me I can't help loving him," and, nestling closer to little Mum, Rose told all that had happened, ending with a rapturous account of the splendid box. "I am very glad, dear. But, Rose, I must warn you of one thing. Don't let uncle spoil you." "But I like to be spoilt, auntie." "I don't doubt it. But if you turn out badly when the year is over, he will be blamed, and his experiment prove a failure. That would be a pity, wouldn't it? When he wants to do so much for you, and can do it if his kind heart does not get in the way of his good judgment." "I never thought of that, and I'll try not to be spoilt. But how can I help it?" asked Rose anxiously. "By not complaining of the wholesome things he wants you to do, by giving him cheerful obedience as well as love, and even making some small sacrifices for his sake." I truly will, and when I get in a worry about things, may I come to you? Uncle told me to, and I feel as if I shouldn't be afraid." "You may, darling. This is the place where little troubles are best cured, and this is what mothers are for, I fancy." And Aunt Jessie drew the curly head to her shoulder, with a tender look that proved how well she knew what medicine the child most needed. It was so sweet and comfortable that Rose sat still enjoying it till a little voice said, "Mamma, don't you think Pokey would like some of my shells? Rose gave Phoebe some of her nice things, and it was very good of her. Can I?" "Who is Pokey?" asked Rose, popping up her head, attracted by the odd name. "My dolly. Do you want to see her?" asked Jamie, who had been much impressed by the tale of adoption he had overheard. "Yes, I'm fond of dollies. Only don't tell the boys, or they will laugh at me." "They don't laugh at me, and they play with my dolly a great deal, but she likes me best." And Jamie ran away to produce his pet. "I brought my old doll, but I keep her hidden because I am too big to play with her, and yet I can't bear to throw her away, I'm so fond of her," said Rose, continuing her confidences in a whisper. "You can come and play with Jamie's whenever you like, for we believe in dollies up here," began Aunt Jessie, smiling to herself as if something amused her. Just then Jamie came back, and Rose understood the smile, for his dolly proved to be a pretty 4-year-old little girl, who trotted in as fast as her fat legs would carry her, and making straight for the shells, scrambled up an armful, saying, with a laugh that showed her little white teeth, "All for Dimmy and me, for Dimmy and me." "That's my dolly. Isn't she a nice one?" asked Jamie, proudly surveying his pet, with his hands behind him, and his short legs rather far apart, a manly attitude copied from his brother's. "She is a dear dolly. But why call her Pokey?" asked Rose, charmed with the new plaything. "She is such an inquisitive little body. She is always poking that mite of a nose into everything, and as Paul Pry did not suit, the boys fell to calling her Pokey. Not a pretty name, but very expressive." It certainly was, for, having examined the shells, the busy tot laid hold of everything she could find, and continued her researches till Archie caught her sucking his carved ivory chessmen to see if they were not barley sugar. Rice paper pictures were also discovered crumpled up in her tiny pocket, and she nearly smashed Will's ostrich egg by trying to sit upon it. "Here, Jim, take her away. She's worse than the puppies, and we can't have her round," commanded the elder brother, picking her up and handing her over to the little fellow, who received her with open arms and the warning remark, "You'd better mind what you do, for I'm going to adopt Pokey like Rose did Phoebe, and then you'll have to be very good to her, you big fellows." "'Dopt away, baby, and I'll give you a cage to keep her in, or you won't have her long, for she is getting worse than a monkey." And Archie went back to his mates, while Aunt Jessie, foreseeing a crisis, proposed that Jamie should take his dolly home, as she was borrowed, and it was time her visit ended. "My dolly is better than yours, isn't she? 'Cause she can walk and talk and sing and dance, and yours can't do anything, can she?" asked Jamie with pride, as he regarded his Pokey, who just then had been moved to execute a funny little jig and warble the well-known couplet, "Puss tat, where you been? I been London to saw a tween." After which superb display she retired, escorted by Jamie, both making a fearful din, blowing on conch shells. "We must tear ourselves away, Rose, because I want to get you home before sunset. Will you come for a drive, Jessie?" said Dr. Alec, as the music died away in the distance. "No, thank you. But I see the boys want to scamper. So, if you don't mind, they may escort you home, but not go in. That is only allowed on holidays." The words were hardly out of Aunt Jessie's mouth when Archie said, in a tone of command, "Pass the word, lads. Boot and saddle, and be quick about it." "All right." And in a moment not a vestige of boy remained but the litter on the floor. The cavalcade went down the hill at a pace that made Rose cling to her uncle's arm, for the fat old horses got excited by the antics of the ponies careering all about them, and went as fast as they could pelt, with the gay dog-cart rattling in front, for Archie and Charlie scorned shelties since this magnificent equipage had been set up. Ben enjoyed the fun, and the lads cut up capers till Rose declared that circus was the proper name for them after all. When they reached the house they dismounted, and stood, three on each side the steps, in martial attitudes, while her ladyship was handed out with great elegance by Uncle Alec. Then the clan saluted, mounted at word of command, and, with a wild whoop, tore down the avenue in what they considered the true Arab style. "That was splendid, now it is safely ended," said Rose, skipping up the steps with her head over her shoulder to watch the dear tassels bob about. "I shall get you a pony as soon as you are a little stronger," said Dr. Alec, watching her with a smile. "Oh, I couldn't ride one of those horrid, frisky little beasts. They roll their eyes and bounce about so I should die of fright," clasping her hands tragically. "Are you a coward?" "About horses I am." "Never mind, then. Come and see my new room." And he led the way upstairs without another word. As Rose followed, she remembered her promise to Aunt Jessie, and was sorry she had objected so decidedly. She was a great deal more sorry 5 minutes later, and well she might be. "Now, take a good look, and tell me what you think of it," said Dr. Alec, opening the door and letting her enter before him, while Phoebe was seen whisking down the back stairs with a dustpan. Rose walked to the middle of the room, stood still, and gazed about her with eyes that brightened as they looked, for all was changed. This chamber had been built out over the library to suit some fancy, and had been unused for years, except at Christmas times, when the old house overflowed. It had 3 windows, one to the east that overlooked the bay, one to the south where the horse-chestnuts waved their green fans, and one to the west towards the hill and the evening sky. A ruddy sunset burned there now, filling the room with an enchanted glow. The soft murmur of the sea was heard, and a robin chirped "Good night" among the budding trees. Rose saw and heard these things first, and felt their beauty with a child's quick instinct. Then her eye took in the altered aspect of the room, once so shrouded, still, and solitary, now so full of light and warmth and simple luxury. India matting covered the floor, with a gay rug here and there. The antique andirons shone on the wide hearth, where a cheery blaze dispelled the dampness of the long-closed room. Bamboo lounges and chairs stood about, and quaint little tables in cozy corners, one bearing a pretty basket, one a desk, and on a third lay several familiar-looking books. In a recess stood a narrow white bed, with a lovely Madonna hanging over it. The Japanese screen, half folded back, showed a delicate toilet service of blue and white set forth on a marble slab, and near by was the great bath pan, with Turkish towels and a sponge as big as Rose's head. "Uncle must love cold water like a duck," she thought, with a shiver. Then her eye went on to the tall cabinet, where a half open door revealed a tempting array of the drawers, shelves, and cubby holes which so delight the hearts of children. "What a grand place for my new things," she thought, wondering what her uncle kept in that cedar retreat. "Oh me! What a sweet toilet table!" was her next mental exclamation as she approached this inviting spot. A round, old-fashioned mirror hung over it, with a gilt eagle atop, holding in his beak the knot of blue ribbon that tied up a curtain of muslin falling on either side of the table, where appeared little ivory-handled brushes, two slender silver candlesticks, a porcelain matchbox, several pretty trays for small matters, and most imposing of all, a plump blue silk cushion, coquettishly trimmed with lace, and pink rosebuds at the corners. That cushion rather astonished Rose. In fact, the whole table did, and she was thinking, with a sly smile, "Uncle is a dandy, but I never should have guessed it," when he opened the door of a large closet, saying, with a careless wave of the hand, "Men like plenty of room for their rattletraps. Don't you think that ought to satisfy me?" Rose peeped in and gave a start, though all she saw was what one usually finds in closets, clothes and boots, boxes and bags. Ah, but you see these clothes were small black and white frocks. The row of little boots that stood below had never been on Dr. Alec's feet. The green bandbox had a gray veil straying out of it, and yes, the bag hanging on the door was certainly her own piece bag, with a hole in one corner. She gave a quick look round the room and understood now why it had seemed too dainty for a man, why her Testament and prayer book were on the table by the bed, and what those rosebuds meant on the blue cushion. It came upon her in one delicious burst that this little paradise was all for her, and, not knowing how else to express her gratitude, she caught Dr. Alec round the neck, saying impetuously, "Oh, uncle, you are too good to me. I'll do anything you ask me, ride wild horses, and take freezing baths, and eat bad-tasting messes, and let my clothes hang on me, to show how much I thank you for this dear, sweet, lovely room." "You like it, then? But why do you think it is yours, my lass?" asked Dr. Alec, as he sat down looking well pleased, and drew his excited little niece to his knee. "I don't think, I know it is for me. I see it in your face, and I feel as if I didn't half deserve it. Aunt Jessie said you would spoil me, and I must not let you. I'm afraid this looks like it, and perhaps, oh me, perhaps I ought not to have this beautiful room after all." And Rose tried to look as if she could be heroic enough to give it up if it was best. "I owe Mrs. Jessie one for that," said Dr. Alec, trying to frown, though in his secret soul he felt that she was quite right. Then he smiled that cordial smile which was like sunshine on his brown face, as he said, "This is part of the cure, Rose, and I put you here that you might take my 3 great remedies in the best and easiest way. Plenty of sun, fresh air, and cold water, also cheerful surroundings and some work, for Phoebe is to show you how to take care of this room, and be your little maid as well as friend and teacher. Does that sound hard and disagreeable to you, dear?" "No, sir, very, very pleasant, and I'll do my best to be a good patient, but I really don't think any one could be sick in this delightful room," she said, with a long sigh of happiness as her eye went from one pleasant object to another. "Then you like my sort of medicine better than Aunt Myra's, and don't want to throw it out the window, hey?" Chapter 7. A Trip to China. "Come, little girl, I've got another dose for you. I fancy you won't take it as well as you did the last, but you will like it better after a while," said Dr. Alec, about a week after the grand surprise. Rose was sitting in her pretty room, where she would gladly have spent all her time, if it had been allowed. But she looked up with a smile, for she had ceased to fear her uncle's remedies, and was always ready to try a new one. The last had been a set of light gardening tools, with which she had helped him put the flower beds in order, learning all sorts of new and pleasant things about the plants as she worked, for, though she had studied botany in school, it seemed very dry stuff compared with Uncle Alec's lively lesson. "What is it now?" she asked, shutting her workbox without a murmur. "Salt water." "How must I take it?" Put on the new suit Miss Hemming sent home yesterday, and come down to the beach. Then I'll show you." "Yes, sir," answered Rose obediently, adding to herself, with a shiver, as he went off, "It is too early for bathing, so I know it is something to do with a dreadful boat." Putting on the new suit of blue flannel, prettily trimmed with white, and the little sailor hat with long streamers, diverted her mind from the approaching trial, till a shrill whistle reminded her that her uncle was waiting. Away she ran through the garden, down the sandy path, out upon the strip of beach that belonged to the house, and here she found Dr. Alec busy with a slender red and white boat that lay rocking on the rising tide. "That is a dear little boat, and Bonnie Belle is a pretty name," she said, trying not to show how nervous she felt. "It is for you, so sit in the stern and learn to steer, till you are ready to learn to row." "Do all boats wiggle about in that way?" she asked, lingering as if to tie her hat more firmly. "Oh, yes, pitch about like nutshells when the sea is a bit rough," answered her sailor uncle, never guessing her secret woe. "Is it rough to-day?" "Not very. It looks a trifle squally to the eastward, but we are all right till the wind changes. Come." "Can you swim, uncle?" asked Rose, clutching at his arm as he took her hand. "Like a fish. Now then." "Oh, please hold me very tight till I get there. Why do you have the stern so far away?" And, stifling several squeaks of alarm in her passage, Rose crept to the distant seat, and sat there holding on with both hands, and looking as if she expected every wave to bring a sudden shipwreck. Uncle Alec took no notice of her fear, but patiently instructed her in the art of steering, till she was so absorbed in remembering which was starboard and which larboard, that she forgot to say "Ow!" every time a big wave slapped against the boat. "Now where shall we go?" she asked, as the wind blew freshly in her face, and a few long, swift strokes sent them half across the little bay. "Suppose we go to China." "Isn't that a rather long voyage?" "Not as I go. Steer round the point into the harbor, and I'll give you a glimpse of China in 20 minutes or so." "I should like that," and Rose sat wondering what he meant, while she enjoyed the new sights all about her. Behind them, the green anthill sloped gently upward to the grove at the top, and all along the seaward side stood familiar houses, stately, cosy, or picturesque. As they rounded the point, the great bay opened before them, full of shipping, and the city lay beyond, its spires rising above the tall masts with their gay streamers. "Are we going there?" she asked, for she had never seen this aspect of the rich and busy old city before. "Yes. Uncle Mac has a ship just in from Hong Kong, and I thought you would like to go and see it." "Oh, I should. I love dearly to go poking about in the warehouses with Uncle Mac. Everything is so curious and new to me, and I'm specially interested in China because you have been there. I'll show you 2 genuine Chinamen who have just arrived. You will like to welcome Wang Lo and Fun Si, I'm sure." "Don't ask me to speak to them, uncle. I shall be sure to laugh at the odd names and the pigtails and the slanting eyes. Please let me just trot round after you. I like that best." "Very well. Now steer towards the wharf where the big ship with the queer flag is. That's the Rajah, and we will go aboard if we can." In among the ships they went, by the wharves where the water was green and still, and queer barnacles grew on the slippery piles. Odd smells saluted her nose, and odd sights met her eyes, but Rose liked it all, and played she was really landing in Hong Kong when they glided up to the steps in the shadow of the tall Rajah. Boxes and bales were rising out of the hold and being carried into the warehouse by stout porters, who tugged and bawled and clattered about with small trucks, or worked cranes with iron claws that came down and clutched heavy weights, whisking them aloft to where wide doors, like mouths, swallowed them up. Dr. Alec took her aboard the ship, and she had the satisfaction of poking her inquisitive little nose into every available corner, at the risk of being crushed, lost, or drowned. "Well, child, how would you like to take a voyage round the world with me in a jolly old craft like this?" asked her uncle, as they rested a minute in the captain's cabin. I should like to see the world, but not in such a small, untidy, smelly place as this. We would go in a yacht, all clean and comfortable. Charlie says that is the proper way," answered Rose, surveying the close quarters with little favor. "You are not a true Campbell if you don't like the smell of tar and salt water, nor Charlie either with his luxurious yacht. Now come ashore and chin chin with the Celestials." After a delightful progress through the great warehouse, peeping and picking as they went, they found Uncle Mac and the yellow gentleman in his private room, where samples, gifts, curiosities, and newly arrived treasures of all sorts were piled up in pleasing profusion and confusion. As soon as possible, Rose retired to a corner, with a porcelain god on one side, a green dragon on the other, and what was still more embarrassing, Fun See sat on a tea chest in front, and stared at her with his beady black eyes till she did not know where to look. Mr. Wang Lo was an elderly gentleman in American costume, with his pigtail neatly wound round his head. He spoke English, and was talking busily with Uncle Mac in the most commonplace way, so Rose considered him a failure. But Fun See was delightfully Chinese, from his junk-like shoes to the button on his pagoda hat, for he had got himself up in style, and was a mass of silk jackets and slouchy trousers. He was short and fat, and waddled comically. His eyes were very slanting, as Rose said. His queue was long, and so were his nails. His yellow face was plump and shiny, and he was altogether a highly satisfactory Chinaman. Uncle Alec told her that Fun See had come out to be educated, and could only speak a little pidgin English. So she must be kind to the poor fellow, for he was only a lad, though he looked nearly as old as Mr. Wang Lo. Rose said she would be kind, but had not the least idea how to entertain the queer guest, who looked as if he had walked out of one of the rice paper landscapes on the wall, and sat nodding at her so like a toy mandarin that she could hardly keep sober. In the midst of her polite perplexity, Uncle Mac saw the two young people gazing wistfully at one another, and seemed to enjoy the joke of this making acquaintance under difficulties. Taking a box from his table, he gave it to Fun See, with an order that seemed to please him very much. Descending from his perch, he fell to unpacking it with great neatness and despatch, while Rose watched him, wondering what was going to happen. Presently, out from the wrappings came a teapot, which caused her to clasp her hands with delight, for it was made in the likeness of a plump little Chinaman. His hat was the cover, his queue the handle, and his pipe the nose. It stood upon feet, in shoes turned up at the toes, and the smile on the fat, sleepy face was so like that on Fun's when he displayed the teapot that Rose couldn't help laughing, which pleased him very much. 2 pretty cups with covers, and a fine scarlet tray completed the set, and made one long to have a dish of tea, even in Chinese style, without cream or sugar. When he had arranged them on a little table before her, Fun signified in pantomime that they were hers, from her uncle. She returned her thanks in the same way, whereupon he returned to his tea-chest, and, having no other means of communication, they sat smiling and nodding at one another in an absurd sort of way, till a new idea seemed to strike Fun. Tumbling off his seat, he waddled away as fast as his petticoats permitted, leaving Rose hoping that he had not gone to get a roasted rat, a stewed puppy, or any other foreign mess which civility would oblige her to eat. While she waited for her funny new friend, she improved her mind in a way that would have charmed Aunt Jane. The gentlemen were talking over all sorts of things, and she listened attentively, storing up much of what she heard, for she had an excellent memory, and longed to distinguish herself by being able to produce some useful information when reproached with her ignorance. She was just trying to impress upon her mind that Amoy was 280 miles from Hong Kong, when Fun came scuffling back, bearing what she thought was a small sword, till he unfurled an immense fan, and presented it with a string of Chinese compliments, the meaning of which would have amused her even more than the sound, if she could have understood it. She had never seen such an astonishing fan, and at once became absorbed in examining it. Of course, there was no perspective whatever, which only gave it a peculiar charm to Rose, for in one place a lovely lady, with blue knitting needles in her hair, sat directly upon the spire of a stately pagoda. In another charming view a brook appeared to flow in at the front door of a stout gentleman's house, and out at his chimney. In a third, a zigzag wall went up into the sky like a flash of lightning, and a bird with two tails was apparently brooding over a fisherman whose boat was just going aground upon the moon. It was altogether a fascinating thing, and she would have sat wafting it to and fro all the afternoon, to Fun's great satisfaction, if Dr. Alec's attention had not suddenly been called to her by a breeze from the big fan that blew his hair into his eyes, and reminded him that they must go. So the pretty china was repacked, Rose furled her fan, and with several parcels of choice tea for the old ladies stowed away in Dr. Alec's pockets, they took their leave, after Fun had saluted them with the 3 bendings and the 9 knockings, as they salute the Emperor or Son of Heaven at home. "I feel as if I had really bended china, and I'm sure I look so," said Rose, as they glided out of the shadow of the Rajah. She certainly did, for Mr. Wang Lo had given her a Chinese umbrella, Uncle Alec had got some lanterns to light up her balcony, the great fan lay in her lap, and the tea set reposed at her feet. "This is not a bad way to study geography, is it?" asked her uncle, who had observed her attention to the talk. "It is a very pleasant way, and I really think I have learned more about China to day than in all the lessons I had at school, though I used to rattle off the answers as fast as I could go. No one explained anything to us, so all I remember is that tea and silk come from there, and the women have little bits of feet. I saw Fun looking at mine, and he must have thought them perfectly immense," answered Rose, surveying her stout boots with sudden contempt. "We will have out the maps and the globe, and I'll show you some of my journeys, telling stories as we go. That will be the next best to doing it actually." "You are so fond of traveling, I should think it would be very dull for you here, uncle. Do you know, Aunt Plenty says she is sure you will be off in a year or two." "Very likely." "Oh me! What shall I do then?" sighed Rose, in a tone of despair that made Uncle Alec's face brighten with a look of genuine pleasure, as he said significantly, "Next time I go, I shall take my little anchor with me. How will that suit?" "Really, uncle?" "Really, niece." Rose gave a little bounce of rapture, which caused the boat to wiggle in a way that speedily quieted her down. But she sat beaming joyfully and trying to think which of some 100 questions she would ask first, when Dr. Alec said, pointing to a boat that was coming up behind them in great style, "How well those fellows row! Look at them and take notes for your own use by and by." The Stormy Petrel was manned by half a dozen jaunty-looking sailors, who made a fine display of blue shirts and shiny hats, with stars and anchors in every direction. "How beautifully they go, and they are only boys. Why, I do believe they are our boys. Yes, I see Charlie laughing over his shoulder. Row, uncle, row! Oh, please do, and not let them catch up with us!" cried Rose, in such a state of excitement that the new umbrella nearly went overboard. "All right, here we go!" And away they did go, with a long, steady sweep of the oars that carried the Bonnie Belle through the water with a rush. The lads pulled their prettiest, but Dr. Alec would have reached the point first, if Rose, in her flurry, had not retarded him by jerking the rudder ropes in a most unseamanlike way, and just as she got right again, her hat blew off. That put an end to the race, and while they were still fishing for the hat, the other boat came alongside, with all the oars in the air, and the jolly young tars ready for a frolic. "Did you catch a crab, uncle?" "No, a bluefish," he answered, as the dripping hat was landed on a seat to dry. "What have you been doing?" "Seeing Fun." "Good for you, Rose. I know what you mean. We are going to have him up to show us how to fly the big kite, for we can't get the hang of it. Isn't he great fun, though?" "No, little fun." "Come, stop joking, and show us what you've got." "You'd better hoist that fan for a sail." "Lend Dandy your umbrella. He hates to burn his pretty nose. I say, uncle, are you going to have a feast of lanterns?" "No, I'm going to have a feast of bread and butter, for it's tea time. If that black cloud doesn't lie, we shall have a gust before long, so you had better get home as soon as you can, or your mother will be anxious, Archie." "Aye, aye, skipper." "Good night, Rose. Come out often, and we'll teach you all there is to know about rowing," was Charlie's modest invitation. Then the boats parted company, and across the water, from the Petrel's crew, came a verse from one of the nonsense songs in which the boys delighted. "Oh, Timballoo, how happy we are! We live in a sieve and a crockery jar, and all night long in the starlight pale we sail away with a pea-green sail, and whistle and warble a moony song to the echoing sound of a coppery gong. Far and few are the land where the Jumblies live. Their heads are green and their hands are blue, and they went to sea in a sieve." Chapter 8. And What Came of It. "Uncle, could you lend me a ninepence? I'll return it as soon as I get my pocket money," said Rose, coming into the library in a great hurry that evening. "I think I could, and I won't charge any interest for it, so you need not be in any hurry to repay me." "Come back here and help me settle these books, if you have nothing pleasanter to do," answered Dr. Alec, handing out the money with that readiness which is so delightful when we ask small loans. "I'll come in a minute. I've been longing to fix my books, but I didn't dare to touch them, because you always shake your head when I read." "I shall shake my head when you write, if you don't do it better than you did in making out this catalogue." "I know it's bad, but I was in a hurry when I did it, and I am in one now." And away went Rose, glad to escape a lecture. But she got it when she came back, for Uncle Alec was still knitting his brows over the list of books, and sternly demanded, pointing to a tipsy-looking title staggering down the page, "Is that meant for pulverized bones, ma'am?" "No, sir, it's Paradise Lost." "Well, I'm glad to know it, for I began to think you were planning to study surgery or farming. And what is this, if you please? Baby's aprons is all I can make of it." Rose looked hard at the scrawl, and presently announced with an air of superior wisdom, "Oh, that's Bacon's Essays." "Miss Power did not teach anything so old-fashioned as writing, I see. Now look at this memorandum Aunt Plenty gave me, and see what a handsome, plain hand that is. She went to a dame's school and learnt a few useful things as well. That is better than a smattering of half a dozen so-called higher branches, I take the liberty of thinking." "Well, I'm sure I was considered a bright girl at school, and learned everything I was taught. Luly and me were the first in all our classes, and specially praised for our French and music, and those sorts of things," said Rose, rather offended at Uncle Alec's criticism. "I dare say, but if your French grammar was no better than your English, I think the praise was not deserved, my dear." "Why, uncle, we did study English grammar, and I could parse beautifully. Miss Power used to have us up to show off when people came. I don't see but I talk as right as most girls." "I dare say you do, but we are all too careless about our English. Now think a minute, and tell me if these expressions are correct. Luly and me, those sort of things, and as right as most girls." Rose pulled her pet curl and put up her lip, but had to own that she was wrong, and said meekly, after a pause which threatened to be sulky, "I suppose I should have said Luly and I in that case, and that sort of things, and rightly, though correctly would have been a better word, I guess." "Thank you. And if you will kindly drop 'I guess,' I shall like my little Yankee all the better. Now see here, Rosie, I don't pretend to set myself up for a model in anything, and you may come down on my grammar, manners, or morals as often as you think I'm wrong, and I'll thank you. I've been knocking about the world for years, and have got careless, but I want my girl to be what I call well educated, even if she studies nothing but the 3 R's for a year to come. Let us be thorough, no matter how slowly we go." He spoke so earnestly and looked so sorry to have ruffled her, that Rose went and sat on the arm of his chair, saying, with a pretty air of penitence, "I'm sorry I was cross, uncle, when I ought to thank you for taking so much interest in me. I guess, no, I think you are right about being thorough, for I used to understand a great deal better when papa taught me a few lessons than when Miss Power hurried me through so many. I declare my head used to be such a jumble of French and German, history and arithmetic, grammar and music, I used to feel sometimes as if it would split. I'm sure I don't wonder it ached," and she held on to it as if the mere memory of the jumble made it swim. "Yet that is considered an excellent school, I find, and I dare say it would be if the benighted lady did not think it necessary to cram her pupils like Thanksgiving turkeys, instead of feeding them in a natural and wholesome way. It is the fault with most American schools, and the poor little heads will go on aching till we learn better." This was one of Dr. Alec's hobbies, and Rose was afraid he was off for a gallop, but he reined himself in and gave her thoughts a new turn by saying suddenly, as he pulled out a fat pocket-book, "Uncle Mac has put all your affairs into my hands now, and here is your month's pocket money. You keep your own little accounts, I suppose." "Thank you. Yes, Uncle Mac gave me an account book when I went to school, and I used to put down my expenses, but I couldn't make them go very well, for figures are the one thing I am not at all clever about," said Rose, rummaging in her desk for a dilapidated little book, which she was ashamed to show when she found it. "Well, as figures are rather important things to most of us, and you may have a good many accounts to keep some day, wouldn't it be wise to begin at once and learn to manage your pennies before the pounds come to perplex you?" "I thought you would do all that fussy part and take care of the pounds, as you call them. Need I worry about it? I do hate sums so." "I shall take care of things till you are of age, but I mean that you shall know how your property is managed, and do as much of it as you can by and by. Then you won't be dependent on the honesty of other people." "Gracious me! As if I wouldn't trust you with millions of billions if I had them!" cried Rose, scandalized at the mere suggestion. "Ah, but I might be tempted. Guardians are sometimes, so you'd better keep your eye on me, and in order to do that you must learn all about these affairs," answered Dr. Alec, as he made an entry in his own very neat account book. Rose peeped over his shoulder at it, and then turned to the arithmetical puzzle in her hand with a sigh of despair. "Uncle, when you add up your expenses, do you ever find you have got more money than you had in the beginning?" "No, I usually find that I have a good deal less than I had in the beginning. Are you troubled in the peculiar way you mention?" "Yes, it is very curious, but I never can make things come out square." "Perhaps I can help you," began Uncle Alec, in the most respectful tone. "I think you had better, for if I have got to keep accounts, I may as well begin the right way. But please don't laugh. I know I'm very stupid, and my book is a disgrace, but I never could get it straight." And with great trepidation Rose gave up her funny little accounts. It really was good in Dr. Alec not to laugh, and Rose felt deeply grateful when he said in a mildly suggestive tone, "The dollars and cents seem to be rather mixed. Perhaps if I just straightened them out a bit, we should find things all right." "Please do, and then show me on a fresh leaf how to make mine look nice and shipshape, as yours do." As Rose stood by him watching the ease with which he quickly brought order out of chaos, she privately resolved to hunt up her old arithmetic and perfect herself in the first 4 rules, with a good tug at fractions, before she read any more fairy tales. "Am I a rich girl, uncle?" she asked suddenly, as he was copying a column of figures. "Rather a poor one, I should say, since you had to borrow a ninepence." "That was your fault, because you forgot my pocket money. But really, shall I be rich by and by?" "I'm afraid you will." "Why afraid, uncle?" "Too much money is a bad thing." "But I can give it away, you know. That is always the pleasantest part of having it, I think." "I'm glad you feel so, for you can do so much good with your fortune if you know how to use it well." "You shall teach me, and when I am a woman we will set up a school where nothing but the 3 R's shall be taught, and all the children live on oatmeal, and the girls have waists a yard round," said Rose, with a sudden saucy smile dimpling her cheeks. "You are an impertinent little baggage, to turn on me in that way, right in the midst of my first attempt at teaching. Never mind, I shall have an extra bitter dose for you next time, miss." "I knew you wanted to laugh, so I gave you a chance. Now I will be good, master, and do my lesson nicely." So Dr. Alec had his laugh, and then Rose sat down and took a lesson in accounts which she never forgot. "Now come and read aloud to me. My eyes are tired, and it is pleasant to sit here by the fire while the rain pours outside and Aunt Jane lectures upstairs," said Uncle Alec, when last month's accounts had been put in good order and a fresh page neatly begun. Rose liked to read aloud, and gladly gave him the chapter in "Nicholas Nickleby" where the Miss Kenwigses take their French lesson. She did her very best, feeling that she was being criticized, and hoping that she might not be found wanting in this as in other things. "Shall I go on, sir?" she asked very meekly when the chapter ended. "If you are not tired, dear, it is a pleasure to hear you, for you read remarkably well," was the answer that filled her heart with pride and pleasure. "Do you really think so, uncle? I'm so glad. Papa taught me, and I read for hours to him, but I thought, perhaps, he liked it because he was fond of me." "So am I, but you really do read unusually well, and I'm very glad of it, for it is a rare accomplishment, and one I value highly. Come here in this cozy, low chair, the light is better, and I can pull these curls if you go too fast. I see you are going to be a great comfort as well as a great credit to your old uncle, Rosie." And Dr. Alec drew her close beside him with such a fatherly look and tone that she felt it would be very easy to love and obey him, since he knew how to mix praise and blame so pleasantly together. Another chapter was just finished when the sound of a carriage warned them that Aunt Jane was about to depart. Before they could go to meet her, however, she appeared in the doorway looking like an unusually tall mummy in her waterproof, with her glasses shining like cat's eyes from the depths of the hood. "Just as I thought, petting that child to death and letting her sit up late reading trash. I do hope you feel the weight of the responsibility you have taken upon yourself, Alec," she said, with a certain grim sort of satisfaction at seeing things go wrong. "I think I have a very realizing sense of it, Sister Jane," answered Dr. Alec, with a comical shrug of the shoulders, and a glance at Rose's bright face. "It is sad to see a great girl wasting these precious hours so. Now my boys have studied all day, and Mac is still at his books, I've no doubt, while you have not had a lesson since you came, I suspect." "I've had 5 to-day, ma'am," was Rose's very unexpected answer. "I'm glad to hear it. And what were they, pray?" Rose looked very demure as she replied, "Navigation, geography, grammar, arithmetic, and keeping my temper." "Queer lessons, I fancy. And what have you learned from this remarkable mixture, I should like to know?" A naughty sparkle came into Rose's eyes as she answered, with a droll look at her uncle. "I can't tell you all, ma'am, but I have collected some useful information about China, which you may like, especially the teas. The best are Lapsing Souchong, Assam Pekoe, Rare Anko, Flowery Pekoe, Hokwa's Mixture, Scented Caper, Padrol Tea, Black Kongu, and Green Twankey. Shanghai is on the Woosung River. Hong Kong means Island of Sweet Waters. Singapore is Lion's Town. Chops are the boats they live in, and they drink tea out of little saucers. Principal productions are porcelain, tea, cinnamon, shawls, tin, tamarinds, and opium. They have beautiful temples and queer gods, and in Canton is the dwelling of the holy pigs, 14 of them, very big and all blind." The effect of this remarkable burst was immense, especially the fact last mentioned. It entirely took the wind out of Aunt Jane's sails. It was so sudden, so varied and unexpected, that she had not a word to say. The glasses remained fixed full upon Rose for a moment, and then, with a hasty "Oh, indeed!" the excellent lady bundled into her carriage and drove away, somewhat bewildered and very much disturbed. She would have been more so if she had seen her reprehensible brother-in-law dancing a triumphal polka down the hall with Rose in honor of having silenced the enemy's battery for once. Chapter 9. Phoebe's Secret. "Why do you keep smiling to yourself, Phoebe?" asked Rose, as they were working together one morning, for Dr. Alec considered housework the best sort of gymnastics for girls, so Rose took lessons of Phoebe in sweeping, dusting, and bed-making. "I was thinking about a nice little secret I know, and couldn't help smiling." "Shall I know it sometime?" "Guess you will." "Shall I like it?" "Oh, won't you, though!" "Will it happen soon?" "Sometime this week." "I know what it is. The boys are going to have fireworks on the 4th, and have got some surprise for me, haven't they?" "That's telling." "Well, I can wait. Only tell me one thing. Is uncle in it?" "Of course he is. There's never any fun without him." "Then it's all right, and sure to be nice." Rose went out on the balcony to shake the rugs, and having given them a vigorous beating, hung them on the balustrade to air, while she took a look at her plants. Several tall vases and jars stood there, and a month of June sun and rain had worked wonders with the seeds and slips she had planted. Morning glories and nasturtiums ran all over the bars, making haste to bloom. Scarlet beans and honeysuckles were climbing up from below to meet their pretty neighbors, and the woodbine was hanging its green festoons wherever it could cling. The waters of the bay were dancing in the sunshine, a fresh wind stirred the chestnut trees with a pleasant sound, and the garden below was full of roses, butterflies, and bees. A great chirping and twittering went on among the birds, busy with their summer housekeeping, and, far away, the white-winged gulls were dipping and diving in the sea, where ships, like larger birds, went sailing to and fro. "Oh, Phoebe, it's such a lovely day. I do wish your fine secret was going to happen right away. I feel just like having a good time, don't you?" said Rose, waving her arms as if she was going to fly. "I often feel that way, but I have to wait for my good times, and don't stop working to wish for 'em. There, now you can finish as soon as the dust settles. I must go do my stairs." And Phoebe trudged away with the broom, singing as she went. Rose leaned where she was, and fell into thinking how many good times she had had lately, for the gardening had prospered finely, and she was learning how to swim and row, and there were drives and walks, and quiet hours of reading and talk with Uncle Alec. And, best of all, the old pain and ennui seldom troubled her now. She could work and play all day, sleep sweetly at night, and enjoy life with the zest of a healthy, happy child. She was far from being as strong and hearty as Phoebe, but she was getting on. The once pale cheeks had color in them now, the hands were growing plump and brown, and the belt was not much too loose. No one talked to her about her health, and she forgot that she had no constitution. She took no medicine but Dr. Alec's 3 great remedies, and they seemed to suit her excellently. Aunt Plenty said it was the pills, but, as no second batch had ever followed the first, I think the old lady was mistaken. Rose looked worthy of her name as she stood smiling to herself over a happier secret than any Phoebe had, a secret which she did not know herself till she found out, some years later, the magic of good health. "Look only," said the brownie, "at the pretty gown of blue, at the kerchief pinned about her head, and at her little shoe," said a voice from below, as a great cabbage rose came flying against her cheek. "What is the princess dreaming about up here in her hanging garden?" added Dr. Alec, as she flung back a morning glory. "I was wishing I could do something pleasant this fine day, something very new and interesting, for the wind makes me feel frisky and gay." "Suppose we take a pull over to the island. I intended to go this afternoon, but if you feel more like it now, we can be off at once." "I do, I do. I'll come in 15 minutes, uncle. I must just scrabble my room to rights, for Phoebe has got a great deal to do." Rose caught up the rugs and vanished as she spoke, while Dr. Alec went in, saying to himself, with an indulgent smile, "It may upset things a trifle, but half a child's pleasure consists in having their fun when they want it." Never did duster flap more briskly than the one Rose used that day, and never was a room scrabbled to rights in such haste as hers. Tables and chairs flew to their places as if alive, curtains shook as if a gale was blowing, china rattled, and small articles tumbled about as if a young earthquake was playing with them. The boating suit went on in a twinkling, and Rose was off with a hop and a skip, little dreaming how many hours it would be before she saw her pretty room again. Uncle Alec was putting a large basket into the boat when she arrived, and before they were off, Phoebe came running down with a queer, knobby bundle, done up in a waterproof. "We can't eat half that luncheon, and I know we shall not need so many wraps. "I wouldn't lumber the boat up so," said Rose, who still had secret scares when on the water. "Couldn't you make a smaller parcel, Phoebe?" asked Dr. Alec, eyeing the bundle suspiciously. "No, sir, not in such a hurry," and Phoebe laughed as she gave a particularly large knob a good poke. "Well, it will do for ballast. Don't forget the note to Mrs. Jessie, I beg of you." "No, sir, I'll send it right off," and Phoebe ran up the bank as if she had wings to her feet. "We'll take a look at the lighthouse first, for you have not been there yet, and it is worth seeing. By the time we have done that, it will be pretty warm, and we will have lunch under the trees on the island." Rose was ready for anything, and enjoyed her visit to the lighthouse on the point very much, especially climbing up the narrow stairs and going inside the great lantern. They made a long stay, for Dr. Alec seemed in no hurry to go, and kept looking through his spyglass as if he expected to discover something remarkable on sea or land. It was past 12 before they reached the island, and Rose was ready for her lunch long before she got it. "Now this is lovely. I do wish the boys were here. Won't it be nice to have them with us all their vacation? Why, it begins today, doesn't it? Oh, I wish I'd remembered it sooner, and perhaps they would have come with us," she said, as they lay luxuriously eating sandwiches under the old apple tree. "So we might. Next time we won't be in such a hurry. I expect the lads will take our heads off when they find us out," answered Dr. Alec, placidly drinking cold tea. "Uncle, I smell a frying sort of a smell," Rose said, pausing suddenly as she was putting away the remains of the lunch half an hour later. "So do I. It is fish, I think." For a moment they both sat with their noses in the air, sniffing like hounds. Then Dr. Alec sprang up, saying with great decision, "Now this won't do. No one is permitted on this island without asking leave. I must see who dares to fry fish on my private property." Taking the basket on one arm and the bundle on the other, he strode away towards the traitorous smell, looking as fierce as a lion, while Rose marched behind under her umbrella. "We are Robinson Crusoe and his man Friday, going to see if the savages have come," she said presently, for her fancy was full of the dear old stories that all children love so well. "And there they are! 2 tents and 2 boats, as I live. These rascals mean to enjoy themselves, that's evident." "There ought to be more boats and no tents. I wonder where the prisoners are." "There are traces of them," and Dr. Alec pointed to the heads and tails of fishes strewn on the grass. "And there are more," said Rose, laughing, as she pointed to a scarlet heap of what looked like lobsters. "The savages are probably eating their victims now. Don't you hear the knives rattle in that tent?" "We ought to creep up and peep. Crusoe was cautious, you know, and Friday scared out of his wits," added Rose, still keeping up the joke. "But this Crusoe is going to pounce upon them, regardless of consequences. If I am killed and eaten, you seize the basket and run for the boat. There are provisions enough for your voyage home." With that, Uncle Alec slipped round the front of the tent, and, casting in the big bundle like a bombshell, roared out in a voice of thunder, "Pirates, surrender!" A crash, a shout, a laugh, and out came the savages, brandishing knives and forks, chicken bones and tin mugs, and all fell upon the intruder, pommeling him unmercifully as they cried, "You came too soon! We're not half ready! You've spoilt it all! Where's Rose?" "Here I am," answered a half stifled voice, and Rose was discovered sitting on the pile of red flannel bathing clothes, which she had mistaken for lobsters, and where she had fallen in a fit of merriment when she discovered that the cannibals were her merry cousins. "You good-for-nothing boys, you are always bursting out upon me in some ridiculous way, and I always get taken in because I'm not used to such pranks. Uncle is as bad as the rest, and it's great fun," she said, as the lads came round her, half scolding, half welcoming, and wholly enjoying the double surprise. "You were not to come till afternoon, and mamma was to be here to receive you. Everything is in a mess now, except your tent. We got that in order the first thing, and you can sit there and see us work," said Archie, doing the honors as usual. Rose felt it in her bones, as Dolly says, that something was in the wind, and wanted to be off at once, so I let her come, and should have kept her away an hour longer if your fish had not betrayed you," explained Uncle Alec, subsiding from a ferocious Crusoe into his good-natured self again. "As this seat is rather damp, I think I'll rise," said Rose, as the excitement lessened a little. Several fishy hands helped her up, and Charlie said, as he scattered the scarlet garments over the grass with an oar, "We had a jolly good swim before dinner, and I told the brats to spread these to dry. Hope you brought your things, Rose, for you belong to the lobsters, you know, and we can have no end of fun teaching you to dive and float and tread water." "I didn't bring anything," began Rose, but was interrupted by the brats, otherwise Will and Geordie, who appeared bearing the big bundle, so much demoralized by its fall that a red flannel tunic trailed out at one end and a little blue dressing gown at the other, while the knobs proved to be a toilet case, rubbers, and a silver mug. "Oh, that sly Phoebe! This was the secret, and she bundled up those things after I went down to the boat," cried Rose with sparkling eyes. "Guess something is smashed up inside, for a bit of glass fell out," observed Will, as they deposited the bundle at her feet. "Catch a girl going anywhere without a looking-glass. We haven't got one among the whole lot of us," added Mac, with masculine scorn. "Dandy has. I caught him touching up his wig behind the trees after our swim," cut in Geordie, wagging a derisive figure at Steve, who promptly silenced him by a smart rap on the head with the drumstick he had just polished off. "Come, come, you lazy lubbers, fall to work, or we shall not be ready for mamma. Take Rose's things to her tent, and tell her all about it, Prince. Mac and Steve, you cut away and bring up the rest of the straw. And you small chaps clear off the table if you have stuffed all you can. Please, uncle, I'd like your advice about the boundary lines and the best place for the kitchen." Every one obeyed the chief, and Rose was escorted to her tent by Charlie, who devoted himself to her service. She was charmed with her quarters, and still more so with the programme which he unfolded before her as they worked. "We always camp out somewhere in vacation, and this year we thought we'd try the island. It is handy, and our fireworks will show off well from here." "Shall we stay over the 4th? 3 whole days! Oh, me! What a frolic it will be!" "Bless your heart, we often camp for a week, we big fellows, but this year the small chaps wanted to come, so we let them. We have great larks, as you'll see, for we have a cave and play Captain Kidd, and have shipwrecks and races and all sorts of games. Arch and I are rather past that kind of thing now, but we do it to please the children," added Charlie, with a sudden recollection of his 16 years. "I had no idea boys had such good times. Their plays never seemed a bit interesting before, but I suppose that was because I never knew any boys very well, or perhaps you are unusually nice ones," observed Rose, with an artless air of appreciation that was very flattering. "We are a pretty clever set, I fancy, but we have a good many advantages, you see. There are a tribe of us to begin with. Then our family has been here for ages, and we have plenty of spondulics, so we can rather lord it over the other fellows, and do as we like. There, ma'am, you can hang your smashed glass on that nail and do up your back hair as fine as you please. You can have a blue blanket or a red one, and a straw pillow or an air cushion for your head, whichever you like. You can trim up to any extent, and be as free and easy as squaws in a wigwam, for this corner is set apart for you ladies, and we never cross the line uncle is drawing until we ask leave. Anything more I can do for you, cousin?" "No, thank you. I think I'll leave the rest till auntie comes, and go and help you somewhere, if I may." "Yes, indeed. Come on and see to the kitchen. Can you cook?" asked Charlie, as he led the way to a rocky nook, where Archie was putting up a sailcloth awning. "I can make tea and toast bread." "Well, we'll show you how to fry fish, and make chowder. Now you just set these pots and pans round tastefully, and sort of tidy up a bit, for Aunt Jessie insists on doing some of the work, and I want it to be decent here." By 4 o'clock the camp was in order, and the weary workers settled down on Lookout Rock to watch for Mrs. Jessie and Jamie, who was never far from mamma's apron string. They looked like a flock of bluebirds, all being in sailor rig, with blue ribbon enough flying from the 7 hats to have set up a milliner. Very tuneful bluebirds they were, too, for all the lads sang, and the echo of their happy voices reached Mrs. Jessie long before she saw them. The moment the boat hove in sight, up went the island flag, and the bluejackets cheered lustily, as they did on every possible occasion, like true young Americans. This welcome was answered by the flapping of a handkerchief, and the shrill "Rah, rah, rah" of the one small tar who stood in the stern, waving his hat manfully, while a maternal hand clutched him firmly in the rear. Cleopatra, landing from her golden galley, never received a heartier greeting than little Mum, as she was borne to her tent by the young folk, for love of whom she smilingly resigned herself to 3 days of discomfort, while Jamie immediately attached himself to Rose, assuring her of his protection from the manifold perils which might assail them. Taught by long experience that boys are always hungry, Aunt Jessie soon proposed supper, and proceeded to get it, enveloped in an immense apron, with an old hat of Archie's stuck atop of her cap. Rose helped, and tried to be as handy as Phoebe, though the peculiar style of table she had to set made it no easy task. It was accomplished at last, and a very happy party lay about under the trees, eating and drinking out of any one's plate and cup, and quite untroubled by the frequent appearance of ants and spiders in places where these interesting insects are not expected to adorn. "I never thought I should like to wash dishes, but I do," said Rose, as she sat in a boat after supper, lazily rinsing plates in the sea, and rocking luxuriously as she wiped them. "Mum is mighty particular. We just give 'em a scrub with sand, and dust 'em off with a bit of paper. It's much the best way, I think," replied Geordie, who reposed in another boat alongside. "How Phoebe would like this! I wonder uncle did not have her come." "I believe he tried to, but Dolly was as cross as two sticks, and said she couldn't spare her. I'm sorry, for we all like the Phoebe bird, and she'd chirp like a good one out here, wouldn't she? She ought to have a holiday like the rest of us. It's too bad to leave her out." This thought came back to Rose several times that evening, for Phoebe would have added much to the little concert they had in the moonlight, would have enjoyed the stories told, been quick at guessing the conundrums, and laughed with all her heart at the fun. The merry going to bed would have been the best of all, for Rose wanted someone to cuddle under the blue blanket with her, there to whisper and giggle and tell secrets, as girls delight to do. Long after the rest were asleep, Rose lay wide awake, excited by the novelty of all about her, and a thought that had come into her mind. Far away she heard a city clock strike 12. A large star like a mild eye peeped in at the opening of the tent, and the soft plash of the waves seemed calling to her to come out. Aunt Jessie lay fast asleep, with Jamie rolled up like a kitten at her feet, and neither stirred as Rose in her wrapper crept out to see how the world looked at midnight. She found it very lovely, and sat down on a cracker keg to enjoy it, with a heart full of the innocent sentiment of her years. Fortunately, Dr. Alex saw her before she had time to catch cold, for, coming out to tie back the door flap of his tent for more air, he beheld the small figure perched in the moonlight. Having no fear of ghosts, he quietly approached, and, seeing that she was wide awake, said, with a hand on her shining hair, "What is my girl doing here?" "Having a good time," answered Rose, not at all startled. "I wonder what she was thinking about with such a sober look." "The story you told us of the brave sailor who gave up his place on the raft to the woman, and the last drop of water to the poor baby. People who make sacrifices are very much loved and admired, aren't they?" she asked earnestly. "If the sacrifice is a true one. But many of the bravest never are known, and get no praise. That does not lessen their beauty, though perhaps it makes them harder, for we all like sympathy," and Dr. Alex sighed a patient sort of sigh. "I suppose you have made a great many? Would you mind telling me one of them?" asked Rose, arrested by the sigh. "My last was to give up smoking," was the very unromantic answer to her pensive question. "Why did you?" "Bad example for the boys." "That was very good of you, uncle. Was it hard?" "I'm ashamed to say it was. But as a wise old fellow once said, it is necessary to do right. It is not necessary to be happy." Rose pondered over the saying as if it pleased her, and then said, with a clear, bright look, "A real sacrifice is giving up something you want or enjoy very much, isn't it?" "Yes." "Doing it one's own self because one loves another person very much and wants her to be happy?" "Yes." and doing it pleasantly, and being glad about it, and not minding the praise if it doesn't come?" "Yes, dear, that is the true spirit of self-sacrifice. You seem to understand it, and I dare say you will have many chances in your life to try the real thing. I hope they won't be very hard ones." "I think they will," began Rose, and there stopped short. "Well, make one now and go to sleep, or my girl will be ill to morrow, and then the aunts will say camping out was bad for her." "I'll go. Good night," and throwing him a kiss, the little ghost vanished, leaving Uncle Alec to pace the shore, and think about some of the unsuspected sacrifices that had made him what he was. Chapter X. Rose's Sacrifice. There certainly were larks on Campbell's Island next day, as Charlie had foretold, and Rose took her part in them like one intent on enjoying every minute to the utmost. There was a merry breakfast, a successful fishing expedition, and then the lobsters came out in full force, for even Aunt Jessie appeared in red flannel. There was nothing Uncle Alec could not do in the water, and the boys tried their best to equal him in strength and skill, so there was a great diving and ducking, for every one was bent on distinguishing himself. Rose swam out far beyond her depth, with her uncle to float her back. Aunt Jessie splashed placidly in the shallow pools, with Jamie paddling near by like a little whale beside its mother, while the lads careered about, looking like a flock of distracted flamingoes, and acting like the famous dancing party in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Nothing but chowder would have lured them from their gambols in the briny deep. That time-honored dish demanded the concentrated action of several mighty minds, so the water babies came ashore and fell to cooking. It is unnecessary to say that, when done, it was the most remarkable chowder ever cooked, and the quantity eaten would have amazed the world if the secret had been divulged. After this exertion a siesta was considered the thing, and people lay about in tents or out as they pleased, the boys looking like warriors, slumbering where they fell. The elders had just settled to a comfortable nap when the youngsters rose, refreshed and ready for further exploits. A hint sent them all off to the cave, and there were discovered bows and arrows, battle clubs, old swords, and various relics of an interesting nature. Perched upon a commanding rock, with Jamie to splain things to her, Rose beheld a series of stirring scenes enacted with great vigor and historical accuracy by her gifted relatives. Captain Cook was murdered by the natives of Hawaii in the most thrilling manner. Captain Kidd buried untold wealth in the chowder kettle at the dead of night, and shot both the trusting villains who shared the secret of the hiding place. Sinbad came ashore there and had manifold adventures, and numberless wrecks bestrewed the sands. Rose considered them by far the most exciting dramas she had ever witnessed, and when the performance closed with a grand ballet of Fiji Islanders, whose barbaric yells alarmed the gulls, she had no words in which to express her gratification. Another swim at sunset, another merry evening on the rocks, watching the lighted steamers pass seaward and the pleasure boats come into port, ended the second day of the camping out, and sent every one to bed early that they might be ready for the festivities of the morrow. "Archie, didn't I hear Uncle ask you to row home in the morning for fresh milk and things?" "Yes, why?" "Please, may I go too? I have something of great importance to arrange. You know I was carried off in a hurry," Rose said in a confidential whisper as she was bidding her cousins good night. "I'm willing, and I guess Charlie won't mind." "Thank you. Be sure you stand by me when I ask leave in the morning, and don't say anything till then, except to Charlie." "Promise," urged Rose so eagerly that Archie stuck an attitude and cried dramatically, "By yonder moon, I swear!" "Hush! It's all right. Go along," and Rose departed as if satisfied. "She's a queer little thing, isn't she, Prince?" "Rather a nice little thing, I think. I'm quite fond of her." Rose's quick ears caught both remarks, and she retired to her tent, saying to herself with sleepy dignity, "Little thing, indeed! Those boys talk as if I was a baby. They will treat me with more respect after tomorrow, I guess." Archie did stand by her in the morning, and her request was readily granted, as the lads were coming directly back. Off they went, and Rose waved her hand to the islanders with a somewhat pensive air, for an heroic purpose glowed within her, and the spirit of self-sacrifice was about to be illustrated in a new and touching manner. While the boys got the milk, Rose ran to Phoebe, ordered her to leave her dishes, to put on her hat, and take a note back to Uncle Alec, which would explain this somewhat mysterious performance. Phoebe obeyed, and when she went to the boat Rose accompanied her, telling the boys she was not ready to go yet, but they could, some of them, come for her when she hung a white signal on her balcony. "But why not come now? What are you about, miss? Uncle won't like it," protested Charlie, in great amazement. "Just do as I tell you, little boy. Uncle will understand and explain. Obey as Phoebe does, and ask no questions. I can have secrets as well as other people." And Rose walked off with an air of lofty independence that impressed her friends immensely. "It's some plot between uncle and herself, so we won't meddle. All right, Phoebe. Pull away, Prince." And off they went to be received with much surprise by the islanders. This was the note Phoebe bore: "Dear Uncle, I'm going to take Phoebe's place today, and let her have all the fun she can. Please don't mind what she says, but keep her, and tell the boys to be very good to her for my sake. Don't think it is easy to do this. It is very hard to give up the best day of all, but I feel so selfish to have all the pleasure and Phoebe none, that I wish to make this sacrifice. Do let me, and don't laugh at it. I truly do not wish to be praised, and I truly want to do it. Love to all. From Rose." "Bless the little dear! What a generous heart she has! Shall we go after her, Jessie, or let her have her way?" said Dr. Alec, after the first mingled amusement and astonishment had subsided. "Let her alone, and don't spoil her little sacrifice. She means it, I know, and the best way in which we can show our respect for her effort is to give Phoebe a pleasant day. I'm sure she has earned it." And Mrs. Jessie made a sign to the boys to suppress their disappointment and exert themselves to please Rose's guest. Phoebe was with difficulty kept from going straight home, and declared that she should not enjoy herself one bit without Miss Rose. "She won't hold out all day, and we shall see her paddling back before noon, I'll wager anything," said Charlie. And the rest so strongly inclined to his opinion that they resigned themselves to the loss of the little queen of the revels, sure that it would only be a temporary one. But hour after hour passed, and no signal appeared on the balcony, though Phoebe watched it hopefully. No passing boat brought the truant back, though more than one pair of eyes looked out for the bright hair under the round hat, and sunset came, bringing no rose but the lovely color in the western sky. I really did not think that the child had it in her. I fancied it was a bit of sentiment, but I see she was in earnest, and means that her sacrifice shall be a true one. Dear little soul! I'll make it up to her 1,000 times over, and beg her pardon for thinking it might be done for effect," Dr. Alec said remorsefully, as he strained his eyes through the dusk, fancying he saw a small figure sitting in the garden as it had sat on the keg the night before, laying the generous little plot that had cost more than he could guess. "Well, she can't help seeing the fireworks, anyway, unless she is goose enough to think she must hide in a dark closet and not look," said Archie, who was rather disgusted at Rose's seeming ingratitude. "She will see ours capitally, but miss the big ones on the hill, unless papa has forgotten all about them," added Steve, cutting short the harangue Mac had begun upon the festivals of the ancients. "I'm sure the sight of her will be better than the finest fireworks that ever went off," said Phoebe, meditating an elopement with one of the boats if she could get a chance. "Let things work. If she resists a brilliant invitation we give her, she will be a heroine," added Uncle Alec, secretly hoping that she would not. Meanwhile, Rose had spent a quiet, busy day helping Dolly, waiting on Aunt Peace, and steadily resisting Aunt Plenty's attempts to send her back to the happy island. It had been hard in the morning to come in from the bright world outside, with flags flying, cannon booming, crackers popping, and every one making ready for a holiday, and to go to washing cups while Dolly grumbled and the aunts lamented. It was very hard to see the day go by, knowing how gay each hour must have been across the water, and how a word from her would take her where she longed to be with all her heart. But it was hardest of all when evening came and Aunt Peace was asleep, Aunt Plenty seeing a gossip in the parlor, Dolly established in the porch to enjoy the show, and nothing left for the little maid to do but sit alone in her balcony and watch the gay rockets whiz up from island, hill, and city, while bands played and boats laden with happy people went to and fro in the fitful light. Then it must be confessed that a tear or two dimmed the blue eyes, and once, when a very brilliant display illuminated the island for a moment, and she fancied she saw the tents, the curly head went down on the railing, and a wide-awake nasturtium heard a little whisper, "I hope some one wishes I was there." The tears were all gone, however, and she was watching the hill and island answer each other with what Jamie called whizzers, whirligigs, and busters, and smiling as she thought how hard the boys must be working to keep up such a steady fire, when Uncle Mac came walking in upon her, saying hurriedly, "Come, child, put on your tippet, pelisse, or whatever you call it, and run off with me. I came to get Phoebe, but aunt says she is gone, so I want you. I've got fun down in the boat, and I want you to go with us and see my fireworks. Got them up for you, and you mustn't miss them, or I shall be disappointed." But uncle, feeling as if she ought to refuse even a glimpse of bliss, perhaps "I know, my dear, I know. Aunt told me. But no one needs you now so much as I do, and I insist on your coming," said Uncle Mac, who seemed in a great hurry to be off, yet was unusually kind. So Rose went and found the little Chinaman with a funny lantern waiting to help her in, and convulse her with laughter trying to express his emotions in pidgin English. The city clocks were striking 9 as they got out into the bay, and the island fireworks seemed to be over, for no rocket answered the last Roman candle that shone on the ant hill. "Ours are done, I see, but they are going up all round the city, and how pretty they are," said Rose, folding her mantle about her and surveying the scene with pensive interest. "Hope my fellows have not got into trouble up there," muttered Uncle Mac, adding with a satisfied chuckle as the spark shone out, "No, there it goes. Look, Rosie, and see how you like this one. It was ordered especially in honor of your coming." Rose looked with all her eyes, and saw the spark grow into the likeness of a golden vase, then green leaves came out, and then a crimson flower glowing on the darkness with a splendid lustre. "Is it a rose, uncle?" she asked, clasping her hands with delight as she recognized the handsome flower. "Of course it is. Look again, and guess what those are," answered Uncle Mac, chuckling and enjoying it all like a boy. A wreath of what looked at first like purple brooms appeared below the vase, but Rose guessed what they were meant for, and stood straight up, holding by his shoulder, and crying excitedly, "Thistles, uncle, Scotch thistles! There are 7 of them, one for each boy. Oh, what a joke!" And she laughed so that she plumped into the bottom of the boat, and stayed there till the brilliant spectacle was quite gone. "That was rather a neat thing, I flatter myself," said Uncle Mac, in high glee at the success of his illumination. "Now shall I leave you on the island, or take you home again, my good little girl?" he added, lifting her up with such a tone of approbation in his voice that Rose kissed him on the spot. "Home, please, uncle, and I thank you very, very much for the beautiful firework you got up for me. I'm so glad I saw it, and I know I shall dream about it," answered Rose steadily, though a wistful glance went toward the island, now so near that she could smell powder and see shadowy figures flitting about. Home they went, and Rose fell asleep saying to herself, "It was harder than I thought, but I'm glad I did it, and I truly don't want any reward but Phoebe's pleasure." Chapter 11. Poor Mac. Rose's sacrifice was a failure in one respect, for, though the elders loved her the better for it, and showed that they did, the boys were not inspired with the sudden respect which she had hoped for. In fact, her feelings were much hurt by overhearing Archie say that he couldn't see any sense in it, and the Prince added another blow by pronouncing her the queerest chicken ever seen. It is apt to be so, and it is hard to bear, for, though we do not want trumpets blown, we do like to have our little virtues appreciated, and cannot help feeling disappointed if they are not. A time soon came, however, when Rose, quite unconsciously, won not only the respect of her cousins, but their gratitude and affection likewise. Soon after the island episode, Mac had a sunstroke, and was very ill for some time. It was so sudden that everyone was startled, and for some days the boy's life was in danger. He pulled through, however, and then, just as the family were rejoicing, a new trouble appeared which cast a gloom over them all. Poor Mac's eyes gave out, and well they might, for he had abused them, and never being very strong, they suffered doubly now. No one dared to tell him the dark predictions of the great oculist who came to look at them, and the boy tried to be patient, thinking that a few weeks of rest would repair the overwork of several years. He was forbidden to look at a book, and as that was the one thing he most delighted in, it was a terrible affliction to the worm. Everyone was ready to read to him, and at first the lads contended for this honor. But as week after week went by, and Mac was still condemned to idleness and a darkened room, their zeal abated, and one after the other fell off. It was hard for the active fellows, right in the midst of their vacation, and nobody blamed them when they contented themselves with brief calls, running of errands, and warm expressions of sympathy. The elders did their best, but Uncle Mac was a busy man. Aunt Jane's reading was of a funereal sort, impossible to listen to long. And the other aunties were all absorbed in their own cares, though they supplied the boy with every delicacy they could invent. Uncle Alec was a host in himself, but he could not give all his time to the invalid, and if it had not been for Rose, the afflicted worm would have fared ill. Her pleasant voice suited him, her patience was unfailing, her time of no apparent value, and her eager good-will was very comforting. The womanly power of self-devotion was strong in the child, and she remained faithfully at her post when all the rest dropped away. Hour after hour she sat in the dusky room, with one ray of light on her book, reading to the boy, who lay with shaded eyes silently enjoying the only pleasure that lightened the weary days. Sometimes he was peevish and hard to please, sometimes he growled because his reader could not manage the dry books he wished to hear, and sometimes he was so despondent that her heart ached to see him. Through all these trials Rose persevered, using all her little arts to please him. When he fretted, she was patient. When he growled, she plowed bravely through the hard pages, not dry to her in one sense, for quiet tears dropped on them now and then, and when Mac fell into a despairing mood, she comforted him with every hopeful word she dared to offer. He said little, but she knew he was grateful, for she suited him better than any one else. If she was late, he was impatient. When she had to go, he seemed forlorn, and when the tired head ached worst, she could always soothe him to sleep, crooning the old songs her father used to love. "I don't know what I should do without that child," Aunt Jane often said. "She's worth all those racketing fellows put together," Mac would add, fumbling about to discover if the little chair was ready for her coming. That was the sort of reward Rose liked, the thanks that cheered her, and whenever she grew very tired, one look at the green shade, the curly head so restless on the pillow, and the poor groping hands, touched her tender heart, and put new spirit into the weary voice. She did not know how much she was learning, both from the books she read and the daily sacrifices she made. Stories and poetry were her delight, but Mac did not care for them, and since his favorite Greeks and Romans were forbidden, he satisfied himself with travels, biographies, and the history of great inventions or discoveries. Rose despised this taste at first, but soon got interested in Livingstone's adventures, Hobson's stirring life in India, and the brave trials and triumphs of Watt and Arkwright, Fulton, and Palissy the potter. The true, strong books helped the dreamy girl. Her faithful service and sweet patience touched and won the boy, and long afterward both learned to see how useful those seemingly hard and weary hours had been to them. One bright morning, as Rose sat down to begin a fat volume entitled "History of the French Revolution," expecting to come to great grief over the long names, Mac, who was lumbering about the room like a blind bear, stopped her by asking abruptly, "What day of the month is it?" "The 7th of August, I believe." "More than half my vacation gone, and I've only had a week of it. I call that hard," and he groaned dismally. "So it is, but there is more to come, and you may be able to enjoy that." "May be able! I will be able! Does that old noodle think I'm going to stay stived up here much longer?" "I guess he does, unless your eyes get on faster than they have yet." "Has he said anything more lately?" "I haven't seen him, you know." "Shall I begin? This looks rather nice." "Read away, it's all one to me," and Mac cast himself down upon the old lounge, where his heavy head felt easiest. Rose began with great spirit, and kept on gallantly for a couple of chapters, getting over the unpronounceable names with unexpected success, she thought, for her listener did not correct her once, and lay so still she fancied he was deeply interested. All of a sudden she was arrested in the middle of a fine paragraph by Mac, who sat bolt upright, brought both feet down with a thump, and said in a rough, excited tone, "Stop! I don't hear a word, and you may as well save your breath to answer my question." "What is it?" asked Rose, looking uneasy, for she had something on her mind, and feared that he suspected what it was. His next words proved that she was right. "Now look here, I want to know something, and you've got to tell me." "Please don't," began Rose beseechingly. "You must, or I'll pull off this shade and stare at the sun as hard as I ever can stare. Come now," and he half rose as if ready to execute the threat. "I will, oh, I will tell if I know, but don't be reckless and do anything so crazy as that," cried Rose, in great distress. "Very well, then listen, and don't dodge as every one else does. Didn't the doctor think my eyes worse the last time he came? Mother won't say, but you shall." "I believe he did," faltered Rose. "I thought so. Did he say I should be able to go to school when it begins?" "No, Mac," very low. "Ah!" That was all, but Rose saw her cousin set his lips together and take a long breath as if she had hit him hard. He bore the disappointment bravely, however, and asked quite steadily in a minute, "How soon does he think I can study again?" It was so hard to answer that. Yet Rose knew she must, for Aunt Jane had declared she could not do it, and Uncle Mac had begged her to break the truth to the poor lad. "Not for a good many months." "How many?" he asked, with a pathetic sort of gruffness. "A year, perhaps." "A whole year! Why, I expected to be ready for college by that time." And, pushing up the shade, Mac stared at her with startled eyes, that soon blinked and fell before the one ray of light. "Plenty of time for that. You must be patient now, and get them thoroughly well, or they will trouble you again when it will be harder to spare them," she said, with tears in her own eyes. "I won't do it. I will study and get through somehow. It's all humbug about taking care so long. These doctors like to keep hold of a fellow if they can. But I won't stand it, I vow I won't," and he banged his fist down on the unoffending pillow as if he were pommeling the hard-hearted doctor. "Now, Mac, listen to me," Rose said very earnestly, though her voice shook a little and her heart ached. "You know you have hurt your eyes, reading by firelight and in the dusk, and sitting up late, and now you'll have to pay for it, the doctor said so. You must be careful and do as he tells you, or you will be blind." "No!" "Yes, it is true, and he wanted us to tell you that nothing but entire rest would cure you. I know it's dreadfully hard, but we'll all help you. I'll read all day long, and lead you, and wait upon you, and try to make it easier." She stopped there, for it was evident that he did not hear a sound, The word blind seemed to have knocked him down, for he had buried his face in the pillow, and lay so still that Rose was frightened. She sat motionless for many minutes, longing to comfort him, but not knowing how, and wishing Uncle Alec would come, for he had promised to tell Mac. Presently a sort of choking sound came out of the pillow, and went straight to her heart, the most pathetic sob she had ever heard, for, though it was the most natural means of relief, the poor fellow must not indulge in it because of the afflicted eyes. The "French Revolution" tumbled out of her lap, and, running to the sofa, she knelt down by it, saying, with the motherly sort of tenderness girls feel for any sorrowing creature, "Oh, my dear, you mustn't cry. It is so bad for your poor eyes. Take your head out of that hot pillow, and let me cool it. I don't wonder you feel so, but please don't cry. I'll cry for you. It won't hurt me." As she spoke, she pulled away the cushion with gentle force, and saw the green shade all crushed and stained with a few hot tears that told how bitter the disappointment had been. Mac felt her sympathy, but, being a boy, did not thank her for it, only sat up with a jerk, saying, as he tried to rub away the telltale drops with the sleeve of his jacket, "Don't bother. Weak eyes always water. I'm all right." But Rose cried out and caught his arm. "Don't touch them with that rough woolen stuff. Lie down and let me bathe them, there's a dear boy. Then there will be no harm done. They do smart confoundedly. I say, don't you tell the other fellows that I made a baby of myself, will you?" he added, yielding with a sigh to the orders of his nurse, who had flown for the eyewash and linen cambric handkerchief. "Of course I won't, but any one would be upset at the idea of being well troubled in this way. I'm sure you bear it splendidly, and you know it isn't half so bad when you get used to it. Besides, it is only for a time, and you can do lots of pleasant things if you can't study. You'll have to wear blue goggles, perhaps. Won't that be funny?" And while she was pouring out all the comfortable words she could think of, Rose was softly bathing the eyes and dabbing the hot forehead with lavender water, as her patient lay quiet with a look on his face that grieved her sadly. Homer was blind, and so was Milton, and they did something to be remembered by in spite of it, he said, as if to himself, in a solemn tone, for even the blue goggles did not bring a smile. "Papa had a picture of Milton and his daughters writing for him. It was a very sweet picture, I thought," observed Rose in a serious voice, trying to meet the sufferer on his own ground. "Perhaps I could study if some one read and did the eye part. Do you suppose I could, by and by?" he asked, with a sudden ray of hope. "I dare say, if your head is strong enough. This sunstroke, you know, is what upset you, and your brain needs rest, the doctor says. I'll have a talk with the old fellow next time he comes, and find out just what I may do. Then I shall know where I am. What a fool I was that day, to be stewing my brains and letting the sun glare on my book, till the letters danced before me. I see 'em now when I shut my eyes. Black balls, bobbing round, and stars and all sorts of queer things. Wonder if all blind people do. Don't think about them. I'll go on reading, shall I? We shall come to the exciting part soon, and then you'll forget all this," suggested Rose. "No, I never shall forget. Hang the old Revolution! I don't want to hear another word of it. My head aches, and I'm hot. Oh, wouldn't I like to go for a pull in the stormy petrel!" And poor Mac tossed about as if he did not know what to do with himself. "Let me sing, and perhaps you'll drop off. Then the day will seem shorter," said Rose, taking up a fan and sitting down beside him. "Perhaps I shall. I didn't sleep much last night, and when I did I dreamed like fun. See here, you tell the people that I know, and it's all right, and I don't want them to talk about it or howl over me. That's all. Now drone away, and I'll try to sleep. Wish I could for a year, and wake up cured. Oh, I wish you could!" Rose said it so fervently that Mac was moved to grope for her apron and hold on to a corner of it, as if it was comfortable to feel her near him. But all he said was, You are a good little soul, Rosie. Give us the Berks, that is a drowsy one that always sends me off." Quite contented with this small return for all her sympathy, Rose waved her fan and sang, in a dreamy tone, the pretty Scotch air, the burden of which is, "Bonnie lassie, will ye gang to the Birks of Aberfeldy?" Whether the lassie went or not I cannot say, but the laddie was off to the land of Nod in about 10 minutes, quite worn out with hearing the bad tidings and the effort to bear them manfully. Chapter 12. The Other Fellows. Rose did tell "the people" what had passed, and no one howled over Mac or said a word to trouble him. He had his talk with the doctor, and got very little comfort out of it, for he found that just what he might do was nothing at all, though the prospect of some study by and by, if all went well, gave him courage to bear the woes of the present. Having made up his mind to do this, he behaved so well that every one was astonished, never having suspected so much manliness in the quiet worm. The boys were much impressed, both by the greatness of the affliction which hung over him, and by his way of bearing it. They were very good to him, but not always particularly wise in their attempts to cheer and amuse, and Rose often found him much downcast after a visit of condolence from the clan. She still kept her place as head nurse and chief reader, though the boys did their best in an irregular sort of way. They were rather taken aback sometimes at finding Rose's services preferred to theirs, and privately confided to one another that "old Mac was getting fond of being mollycoddled." But they could not help seeing how useful she was, and owning that she alone had remained faithful, a fact which caused some of them much secret compunction now and then. Rose felt that she ruled in that room, if nowhere else, for Aunt Jane left a great deal to her, finding that her experience with her invalid father fitted her for a nurse, and in a case like this her youth was an advantage rather than a drawback. Mac soon came to think that no one could take care of him so well as Rose, and Rose soon grew fond of her patient, though at first she had considered this cousin the least attractive of the 7. He was not polite and sensible like Archie, nor gay and handsome like Prince Charlie, nor neat and obliging like Steve, nor amusing like the Brats, nor confiding and affectionate like little Jamie. He was rough, absent-minded, careless and awkward, rather priggish, and not at all agreeable to a dainty, beauty-loving girl like Rose. But when his trouble came upon him, she discovered many good things in this cousin of hers, and learned not only to pity, but to respect and love the poor worm, who tried to be patient, brave, and cheerful, and found it a harder task than any one guessed, except the little nurse, who saw him in his gloomiest moods. She soon came to think that his friends did not appreciate him, and upon one occasion was moved to free her mind in a way that made a deep impression on the boys. Vacation was almost over, and the time drawing near when Mac would be left outside the happy school world which he so much enjoyed. This made him rather low in his mind, and his cousins exerted themselves to cheer him up, especially one afternoon, when a spasm of devotion seemed to seize them all. Jamie trudged down the hill with a basket of blackberries which he had picked all his own self, as his scratched fingers and stained lips plainly testified. Will and Geordie brought their puppies to beguile the weary hours, and the 3 elder lads called to discuss baseball, cricket, and kindred subjects, eminently fitted to remind the invalid of his privations. Rose had gone to drive with Uncle Alec, who declared she was getting as pale as a potato sprout, living so much in a dark room. But her thoughts were with her boy all the while, and she ran up to him the moment she returned, to find things in a fine state of confusion. With the best intentions in life, the lads had done more harm than good, and the spectacle that met Nurse Rose's eyes was a trying one. The puppies were yelping, the small boys romping, and the big boys all talking at once. The curtains were up, the room close, berries scattered freely about, Mac's shade half off, his cheeks flushed, his temper ruffled, and his voice loudest of all as he disputed hotly with Steve about lending certain treasured books which he could no longer use. Now Rose considered this her special kingdom, and came down upon the invaders with an energy which amazed them and quelled the riot at once. They had never seen her roused before, and the effect was tremendous, also comical, for she drove the whole flock of boys out of the room, like an indignant little hen defending her brood. They all went as meekly as sheep. The small lads fled from the house precipitately, but the 3 elder ones only retired to the next room, and remained there hoping for a chance to explain and apologize, and so appease the irate young lady, who had suddenly turned the tables and clattered them about their ears. As they waited, they observed her proceedings through the half-open door, and commented upon them briefly but expressively, feeling quite bowed down with remorse at the harm they had innocently done. "She's put the room to rights in a jiffy. What jacks we were to let those dogs in and kick up such a row," observed Steve, after a prolonged peep. "The poor old worm turns as if she was treading on him instead of cuddling him like a pussy cat. Isn't he cross, though?" added Charlie, as Mac was heard growling about his confounded head. "She will manage him, but it's mean in us to rumple him up and then leave her to smooth him down. I'd go and help, but I don't know how," said Archie, looking much depressed, for he was a conscientious fellow, and blamed himself for his want of thought. "No more do I. Odd, isn't it, what a knack women have for taking care of sick folks?" And Charlie fell a musing over this undeniable fact. "She has been ever so good to Mac," began Steve, in a self-reproachful tone. "Better than his own brother, hey?" cut in Archie, finding relief for his own regret in the delinquencies of another. "Well, you needn't preach. You didn't any of you do any more, and you might have, for Mac likes you better than he does me. I always fret him, he says, and it isn't my fault if I am a quiddle," protested Steve in self-defense. "We have all been selfish and neglected him, so we won't fight about it, but try to do better," said Archie, generously taking more than his share of blame, for he had been less inattentive than either of the others. "Rose has stood by him like a good one, and it's no wonder he likes to have her round best. I should myself if I was down on my luck as he is," put in Charlie, feeling that he had really not done the little thing justice. "I'll tell you what it is, boys, we haven't been half good enough to Rose, and we've got to make it up to her somehow," said Archie, who had a very manly sense of honor about paying his debts, even to a girl. "I'm awfully sorry I made fun of her doll when Jamie lugged it out, and I called her Baby Bunting when she cried over the dead kitten. Girls are such geese sometimes I can't help it," said Steve, confessing his transgressions handsomely, and feeling quite ready to atone for them if he only knew how. "I'll go down on my knees and beg her pardon for treating her as if she was a child. Don't it make her mad, though? Come to think of it, she's only 2 years or so younger than I am. But she is so small and pretty, she always seems like a dolly to me," and the prince looked down from his lofty height of 5 feet 5 as if Rose was indeed a pygmy beside him. "That dolly has got a real good little heart, and a bright mind of her own, you'd better believe. Max says she understands some things quicker than he can, and mother thinks she is an uncommonly nice girl, though she don't know all creation. You needn't put on airs, Charlie, though you are a tall one, for Rose likes Archie better than you. She said she did, because he treated her respectfully." "Steve looks as fierce as a gamecock. But don't you get excited, my son, for it won't do a bit of good. Of course everybody likes the chief best. They ought to, and I'll punch their heads if they don't. So calm yourself, Dandy, and mend your own manners before you come down on other people's." Thus said the prince, with great dignity and perfect good nature, while Archie looked modestly gratified with the flattering opinions of his kinsfolk, and Steve subsided, feeling he had done his duty as a cousin and a brother. A pause ensued, during which Aunt Jane appeared in the other room, accompanied by a tea tray sumptuously spread, and prepared to feed her big nestling, as that was a task she allowed no one to share with her. "If you have a minute to spare before you go, child, I wish you'd just make Mac a fresh shade. This has got a berry stain on it, and he must be tidy, for he is to go out to morrow if it is a cloudy day," said Mrs. Jane, spreading toast in a stately manner, while Mac slopped his tea about without receiving a word of reproof. "Yes, aunt," answered Rose, so meekly that the boys could hardly believe it could be the same voice which had issued the stern command, "Out of this room, every one of you!" not very long ago. They had not time to retire, without unseemly haste, before she walked into the parlor and sat down at the work table without a word. It was funny to see the look the three tall lads cast at the little person sedately threading a needle with green silk. They all wanted to say something expressive of repentance, but no one knew how to begin, and it was evident from the prim expression of Rose's face that she intended to stand upon her dignity till they had properly abased themselves. The pause was becoming very awkward when Charlie, who possessed all the persuasive arts of a born scapegrace, went slowly down upon his knees before her, beat his breast, and said, in a heartbroken tone, "Please forgive me this time, and I'll never do so any more." It was very hard to keep sober, but Rose managed it and answered gravely, "It is Mac's pardon you should ask, not mine, for you haven't hurt me, and I shouldn't wonder if you had him a great deal, with all that light and racket, and talk about things that only worry him." "Do you really think we've hurt him, cousin?" asked Archie with a troubled look, while Charlie settled down in a remorseful heap among the table legs. "Yes, I do, for he has got a raging headache, and his eyes are as red as this emery bag," answered Rose, solemnly plunging her needle into a fat flannel strawberry. Steve tore his hair, metaphorically speaking, for he clutched his cherished topknot, and wildly dishevelled it, as if that was the heaviest penance he could inflict upon himself at such short notice. Charlie laid himself out flat, melodramatically begging some one to take him away and hang him, but Archie, who felt worst of all, said nothing except to vow within himself that he would read to Mac till his own eyes were as red as a dozen emery bags combined. Seeing the wholesome effects of her treatment upon these culprits, Rose felt that she might relent and allow them a gleam of hope. She found it impossible to help trampling upon the prostrate prince a little, in words at least, for he had hurt her feelings oftener than he knew, so she gave him a thimble pie on the top of his head, and said with an air of infinitely superior being, "Don't be silly, but get up, and I'll tell you something much better to do than sprawling on the floor and getting all over lint." Charlie obediently sat himself upon a hassock at her feet. The other sinners drew near to catch the words of wisdom about to fall from her lips, and Rose, softened by this gratifying humility, addressed them in her most maternal tone. "Now, boys, if you really want to be good to Mac, you can do it in this way. Don't keep talking about things he can't do, or go and tell what fun you have had batting your ridiculous balls about. Get some nice book and read quietly. Cheer him up about school, and offer to help him study by and by. You can do that better than I, because I'm only a girl, and don't learn Greek and Latin and all sorts of headachy stuff." "Yes, but you can do heaps of things better than we can. You've proved that," said Archie, with an approving look that delighted Rose, though she could not resist giving Charlie one more rebuke, by saying, with a little bridling of the head, and a curl of the lip that wanted to smile instead, "I'm glad you think so, though I am a queer chicken." This scathing remark caused the prince to hide his face for shame, and Steve to erect his head in the proud consciousness that this shot was not meant for him. Archie laughed, and Rose, seeing a merry blue eye winking at her from behind two brown hands, gave Charlie's ear a friendly tweak, and extended the olive branch of peace. "Now we'll all be good, and plan nice things for poor Max," she said, smiling so graciously that the boys felt as if the sun had suddenly burst out from behind a heavy cloud, and was shining with great brilliancy. The storm had cleared the air, and quite a heavenly calm succeeded, during which plans of a most varied and surprising sort were laid, for every one burned to make noble sacrifices upon the shrine of "poor Mac," and Rose was the guiding star to whom the others looked with most gratifying submission. Of course, this elevated state of things could not endure long, but it was very nice while it lasted, and left an excellent effect upon the minds of all when the first ardor had subsided. "There, that's ready for to morrow, and I do hope it will be cloudy," said Rose, as she finished off the new shade, the progress of which the boys had watched with interest. "I'd bespoken an extra sunny day, but I'll tell the clerk of the weather to change it. He's an obliging fellow, and he'll attend to it, so make yourself easy," said Charlie, who had become quite perky again. "It is very easy for you to joke, but how would you like to wear a blinder like that for weeks and weeks, sir?" And Rose quenched his rising spirits by slipping the shade over his eyes, as he still sat on the cushion at her feet. "It's horrid! Take it off! Take it off!" "I don't wonder the poor old boy has the blues with a thing like that on," and Charlie sat looking at what seemed to him an instrument of torture, with such a sober face that Rose took it gently away, and went in to bid Mac good night. "I shall go home with her, for it is getting darkish, and she is rather timid," said Archie, forgetting that he had often laughed at this very timidity. "I think I might, for she's taking care of my brother," put in Steve, asserting his rights. "Let's all go, that will please her," proposed Charlie, with a burst of gallantry which electrified his mates. "We will," they said with one voice, and they did, to Rose's great surprise and secret contentment, though Archie had all the care of her, for the other two were leaping fences, running races, and having wrestling matches all the way down. They composed themselves on reaching the door, however, shook hands cordially all around, made their best bows, and retired with great elegance and dignity, leaving Rose to say to herself, with girlish satisfaction, as she went in, "Now that is the way I like to be treated."